Hello, midnight wanderers, and welcome to Dreadvane. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. My husband and I had gone out shopping together. Just a regular weekend errand day, nothing special about it. Our daughter was with us, strapped into her stroller, about 8 months old at the time, wide awake and looking around at everything the way babies that age do. We had a short list of things to grab, nothing urgent, and we were taking our time walking through the store, chatting about small things, when we ran into a woman my husband recognized right away. She worked with him, someone he saw almost every day at the office, and the two of them fell into that easy kind of small talk that coworkers have when they bump into each other outside of work. It always feels a little strange seeing someone from work in a completely different setting, like your brain has to reset for a second, but it was friendly and normal. The coworker noticed our daughter almost immediately. Babies have that effect on people, especially strangers in public spaces. And she leaned down a little to smile at her and asked how old she was, what her name was, all the usual questions people ask when they see a baby out in public. It felt completely ordinary. I answered her questions, feeling that small, proud parent glow you get when someone compliments your child, and without thinking twice about it, I passed our daughter over to her so she could hold her for a moment. It is such a normal thing to do. People do it all the time in stores, at parks, in waiting rooms. You do not expect anything strange to come from a simple, friendly moment like that. While the coworker was holding my daughter, I noticed another woman standing a little behind her, maybe a foot or so back, just off to the side. She was smiling the entire time, watching the interaction the same way you would watch someone hold a baby and coo over how cute they are. Because she was standing so close to the coworker, and because she seemed just as warm and friendly, my husband and I assumed the two of them were together. Maybe friends who had run into each other while shopping, or two coworkers who had come out together. It did not even occur to us that they might be complete strangers to each other. Why would it? They were standing close, both smiling at the same baby, both seemingly part of the same little moment. Then, the second woman spoke up. She asked, in a sweet, almost pleading tone, if she could hold the baby too. It was phrased in that gentle way people use when they want to seem harmless and polite, the kind of tone that makes you feel a little guilty saying no. My husband and I glanced at each other for half a second, and then we both looked toward the coworker, half expecting her to say something like, "Oh yeah, she is with me," or introduce the other woman somehow. Instead, the coworker looked back at us with a kind of questioning expression. The one that silently asks, "Is this okay with you?" Since we assumed the two women were together, we read her expression as simple politeness, not confusion. We said, "Sure, that should be fine," thinking it was a friend of hers. The coworker took a step back for a second, so the stranger could ease closer, and my husband gently passed the baby into the arms of a woman we had never met before in our lives. That is when things started to feel different, very quickly, actually. It only took a moment for something in the atmosphere to shift. The kind of shift you feel physically before your mind even catches up with what is happening. The coworker started saying her goodbyes, telling my husband it was nice running into him, saying she had to get going, and then she turned and started walking away. Just like that. Walking away, without the woman who was holding our daughter. For a second, neither my husband nor I said anything. We just stood there, watching the coworker's back as she walked farther and farther away, and then our eyes moved back to the stranger holding our baby. She was not simply holding her the way people normally hold a baby they just met. That light, careful, slightly awkward hold most strangers have. She was cradling her tightly against her chest, rocking a little, her face pressed close, completely wrapped up in the moment in a way that felt too intense, too personal, too much like something that belonged to someone else's private memory rather than a random encounter in a store. And then she started talking. Not to us. Not really. She was murmuring to herself, in this soft, broken sort of voice. The kind of voice that comes out when someone is remembering something painful. She said she missed babies so much. She said it more than once. Her tone had this ache to it that was hard to listen to. A rawness that made the moment feel heavier than anything happening in a normal shopping trip should feel. Then she said the words that made my stomach drop completely. She said they had taken her son away from her because they said she was an unfit mother. She kept talking, almost like she had slipped into a different world entirely, a world where we were not standing right there watching her. She started arguing with herself, whispering back and forth as if she were having a conversation with the people who had taken her child away, or maybe with herself, or maybe with no one at all. "You were not unfit," she said, her voice cracking. "What do they know?" She repeated variations of that a few times, rocking my daughter gently the entire time, completely lost in whatever memory or grief she was reliving in that instant. I do not think I have ever moved faster in my life. Everything in me went cold and sharp at the same time, this jolt of protective instinct that shut down every other thought in my head. I did not think about being polite. I did not think about causing a scene or making things awkward. I stepped forward, reached out, and took my daughter straight out of her arms, pulling her against my own chest in one motion. I do not even fully remember deciding to do it. My body just did it before my brain finished processing what I had heard. The second I had her back, safe against me, I turned to my husband, and without saying much of anything, the two of us started moving, quickly, toward the exit. We did not run, not exactly, because running might have caused a scene we did not want to deal with in that moment. But we walked as fast as we possibly could without breaking into a full sprint. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. My arms were locked tightly around my daughter, holding her the way you hold something you almost lost. Even though logically only a minute or two had passed, it felt like much longer. Neither of us looked back until we were outside, in the parking lot, walking briskly toward our car. I remember scanning the area behind us, checking to see if the woman had followed, half expecting to see her standing in the doorway of the store, still lost in her own world, or worse, walking toward us. She was not there. Still, my hands were shaking as I got my daughter into her car seat. My husband was quiet too, the kind of quiet that comes after something scary happens and your brain is still trying to make sense of it. Once we were in the car, seated, doors locked, engine running, it all hit me at once. The fear came rushing in the way it sometimes does after the danger has already passed, when your body finally lets itself feel what it did not have time to feel in the moment. My hands would not stop shaking. My chest felt tight. I kept replaying the entire thing over and over in my head, trying to understand how something so ordinary, a woman asking to hold a baby in a store, had turned into one of the most frightening moments of my entire life. Looking back, it is strange how quickly everything unraveled. In the span of maybe 2 or 3 minutes, a friendly, everyday interaction had become something that left me shaking for hours afterward. It was the assumption that broke everything open. We assumed the two women knew each other simply because they were standing close and smiling at the same time. That assumption is the only reason my daughter ended up in a stranger's arms at all. If the coworker had said, "Oh, I don't actually know her," we never would have handed our baby over. But she gave that little questioning look, and we misread it completely, thinking she was asking permission on behalf of a friend, not silently trying to figure out what was happening herself. I think about the specific words that woman used too. She did not simply say she loved babies or that it had been a while since she held one. She said, very clearly, that her own son had been taken away from her because she had been found unfit as a mother. That is not something you say lightly, and it is not something you imagine on the spot. Whatever had happened to her, whatever pain she was carrying, it was real enough that it spilled out of her the moment she had a baby in her arms again. That is what makes the memory so unsettling even now. It was not just a stranger being a little too affectionate with a baby in public. It was a woman clearly dealing with some kind of deep loss or trauma. Someone who may not have been in a stable state of mind, holding my daughter and having what looked like a small breakdown right there in the middle of a shopping trip. I want to be fair, because I have thought about this moment a lot since it happened. I do not know her full story. I do not know what actually happened with her son, whether the situation was fair or unfair, whether she truly was unfit, or if something else entirely was going on. It is entirely possible she was a grieving mother who missed her child deeply and simply reacted emotionally to holding a baby again. But none of that changes how frightening it was to stand there and watch a stranger cradle my daughter while whispering to herself about losing her own child. In that moment, my only thought was getting my baby back into my arms and getting both of us somewhere safe. People sometimes ask me afterward if I think the woman meant any harm, if I think she would have actually tried to walk off with my daughter or hurt her in any way. Honestly, I do not know, and I do not think I need to know in order to understand why my body reacted the way it did. Fear does not always wait for proof. Sometimes it just recognizes a situation as wrong long before your mind can explain exactly why, and it pushes you to act. That protective instinct took over completely, and I am grateful it did. Because it meant I did not stand there overthinking whether I was being rude or dramatic. I just moved. It is strange, comparing that moment to other frightening experiences in my life. Years earlier, when I was still in my late teens, I had an experience that I always assumed would remain the scariest moment of my life. I was walking somewhere, minding my own business, when a man appeared in a dark alley and exposed himself to me before grabbing at me. I remember the panic of that moment vividly. The way my body went into pure survival mode. The way I ran and did not stop running until I felt safe again. For years, I thought nothing else would ever come close to matching that kind of fear. Then this happened, standing in a bright, ordinary store, surrounded by other shoppers, with my husband right there beside me. And somehow it managed to rival that older memory in terms of pure terror. Maybe it is because this time it was not about my own safety. It was about my daughter's safety. And there is something about fear for your child that hits differently than fear for yourself. When it is your own body in danger, some deep survival instinct pushes you forward. But when it is your child, that instinct becomes something even sharper, something almost primal. I did not think about myself once during those few minutes. I only thought about getting her back. Since that day, I have become far more careful about handing my daughter to anyone, even people who seem friendly, even in situations that feel harmless. I always make sure I know exactly who someone is before letting them hold her, even briefly. I no longer assume that two people standing near each other are automatically together or automatically safe just because they are smiling. It sounds like such a small, obvious lesson, but it took living through that moment to really understand how quickly things can shift when you make an assumption without checking it first. I still think about that woman sometimes, more than I probably should. I wonder if she is okay. if she got some kind of help for whatever she was going through, if she ever managed to see her son again. Despite how frightening the moment was, there is a part of me that still holds a strange kind of sympathy for her. Because grief like that, the kind that spills out of someone in public without them even realizing it, is not something anyone experiences without real pain behind it. But sympathy does not erase the fear. And it does not change the fact that my instincts told me to get my daughter out of there as fast as possible. And I trust those instincts completely, even now, looking back on it. That day taught me something I carry with me every single time I am out in public with my kids now. Trust your gut. If something feels even slightly off, even if you cannot explain exactly why, listen to that feeling instead of talking yourself out of it. I am endlessly thankful that I reacted the way I did, without hesitation, without worrying about seeming rude or making the situation awkward. In the end, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting my daughter back into my arms, safe, and walking away from a moment that could have gone in a very different direction if I had waited even a few seconds longer. My house was built in the 1960s, and from the time my family moved in, there was something wrong with it. I do not know every detail about the history of the place, and I have never been able to find solid proof for everything we were told, so I cannot claim I know the full truth. But when my parents bought the house, the realtor had to disclose that someone had died there. According to what we were told, one of the families that lived in the house before us had abused and killed their daughter inside it. That is already a horrible thing to hear before moving into a home. Most people would probably feel uneasy just knowing that. But the realtor also mentioned that the last few families who had lived there never stayed long. That detail bothered me more as I got older. At the time, I was too young to fully understand what that meant. Families move for all kinds of reasons. Jobs change, money changes, people separate, houses need repairs. But when several families move into the same house and leave quickly, especially after a death like that, it starts to feel like a warning. Over the years, we found strange things in the house that made the story feel more real, even though we still could not prove everything. The two things I remember most clearly were deeply disturbing. One was a large blood splatter hidden under wallpaper in the master bathroom. That was not something small or easy to explain away. It was not a stain that looked kind of like blood if you stared at it too long. It was a big splatter, covered up and hidden behind wallpaper, like someone had tried to erase it without really removing it. The second thing was a deadbolt on the outside of one of the bedroom doors. That detail still makes my stomach turn. A lock on the outside of a bedroom door means someone was meant to be locked in, not kept safe from the outside. It changes the whole feeling of a room. A normal bedroom is supposed to be a private space, a place to sleep, rest, and feel safe. But a bedroom with a deadbolt on the outside feels like a cell. It makes you wonder who was locked in there, why they were locked in, and what they went through behind that door. I cannot say for sure that those things were connected to the girl we were told about. But in that house, it was hard not to connect them. The more we lived there, the more the place felt like it was holding on to something terrible. Not sad in a quiet way. Not like the air was full of grief. It felt darker than that. It felt angry, heavy, and cruel. That house was absolutely haunted by something dark. I know some people do not believe in spirits, and I understand that. I am not the kind of person who expects everyone to accept a ghost story without question. But that house had a presence that even skeptical people could feel. I had friends who did not believe in ghosts at all, and even they did not like coming over. Some of them refused to come inside after visiting once or twice. They could not explain it, but they said the house felt bad. They said it had a heavy feeling, like something was pressing down on them. There was one bedroom in particular that I refused to go into for years. I hated that room. I hated even walking near it. As soon as anyone came close to the door, this overpowering sense of dread would hit. It was not a normal kind of fear. It was not just being creeped out because of a story. It felt physical. Your body would react before your mind did. Your stomach would tighten, your chest would feel heavy, and every instinct in you would say, "Do not go in there." It was like the room had its own warning around it. Every single member of my family had some kind of paranormal experience in that house. We did not all experience the same things, but we all experienced something. That is one of the reasons I have never been able to tell myself it was only my imagination. If it had only been me, maybe I could doubt myself more. Maybe I could say I was a scared kid who knew too much about the house's history. But it was not only me. Everyone in my family had stories. Things moved. Sounds came from empty rooms. The air changed in certain places. People felt watched. The house made sure everyone knew something was there. My most terrifying experience happened when I was around 14 or 15. I was in my bedroom late at night, watching TV and goofing off like any teenager. My door was closed. My parents were in their room asleep. The house was quiet in that deep nighttime way, when every small noise seems louder because the rest of the world has gone still. I was not thinking about the haunted parts of the house at first. I was just staying up late, probably enjoying the fact that everyone else was asleep and I had my own little space. We had a dog at the time, and she was in the room with me. She was fast asleep, completely relaxed. Having her there usually helped me feel safer. Dogs make a room feel less lonely. You think that if something is really wrong, they will hear it first or react before you do. So when she was asleep, I felt like things were okay. Then I started hearing a strange sound. At first, it was faint enough that I had to stop and listen. I lowered my attention from the TV and focused on the door. The sound came again, and this time I understood what it sounded like. It sounded like a cat scratching at my bedroom door. Slow scratches, loud scratches. Not quick little taps, not a mouse in the wall, not the house settling. It was the sound of claws dragging against the door, over and over again. It started low, near the bottom half of the door, and it had this slow, deliberate rhythm that made my skin crawl. It sounded like something was standing outside my room, clawing at the wood. The feeling of dread came over me almost immediately. It was the same kind of dread that certain parts of the house always gave me, but stronger. It filled the room. One minute I was just watching TV, and the next I felt like I was trapped. The door in front of me no longer felt like a normal bedroom door. It felt like the only thing between me and whatever was outside. I stared at it, while the scratching continued. Our dog stayed asleep in the room with me, which somehow made it worse. If she had woken up and barked, at least I would have felt like I was not alone in hearing it. But she did not react. She was asleep, and my parents were asleep, and I was sitting there listening to something scrape at my door in the middle of the night. I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe something was caught on the other side of the door. Maybe the house was making a weird sound. Maybe an animal had somehow gotten inside. But none of that made sense. We did not have a cat scratching at my bedroom door. There was no reason for an animal to be in the hallway. And the sound was too clear. It was not a vague noise. It was scratching. Slow, loud, patient scratching. It went on for what felt like forever. I am not sure anymore if it lasted 10 minutes or 20 minutes, but at the time, it felt endless. When you are scared, time stretches. Every second feels longer because you are waiting for the next sound. The scratching would continue, pause, and then start again. Each time it came back, my heart would jump. I kept expecting the door to move. I kept expecting the handle to turn. I kept expecting whatever was out there to finally stop scratching and come bursting into my room. I did not want to open the door. I did not want to call out. I did not want to wake my parents, because calling for them meant making noise, and making noise felt like announcing that I was there, even though whatever was outside clearly already knew. I just sat there, frozen, listening to the claws move against the wood. The sound was so slow that it felt intentional. That is what terrified me most. It did not sound like an animal trying to get in randomly. It sounded like something wanted me to listen. It sounded like it knew exactly how afraid I was and was taking its time. I remember looking at my dog, hoping she would wake up, hoping she would lift her head, growl, bark, do anything to prove that I was not losing my mind. But she slept on. The TV was still on, but I was not watching it anymore. The light from the screen moved around the room, making shadows shift against the walls. The rest of the house outside my door was dark. The scratching kept going. Eventually, it stopped. There was no final bang, no sudden rush, no voice. It just stopped, leaving the room in silence. In some ways, that silence was just as bad. I sat there waiting for it to start again. I stared at the door, hardly breathing, expecting the claws to return. But they did not. Somehow, after all that, I eventually fell asleep. I do not know how. Maybe fear exhausted me. Maybe my teenage brain simply shut down, because it could not stay awake forever. But I fell asleep in that room with the door still closed, knowing something had been scratching at it from the other side. The next morning, I went to look at the door. Part of me expected there to be nothing. That is what always happens in the morning, right? The thing that scared you at night turns into nothing in daylight. A shadow becomes a chair. A sound becomes the pipes. A nightmare fades away. I think a small part of me hoped the door would be clean, because then I could tell myself I had imagined it. But the bottom half of my door was covered in scratches. Thin, long scratches. They looked like someone had taken a knife and dragged it down the wood over and over again. They were not tiny marks. They were not old scratches I had somehow never noticed before. They were exactly where the sound had been coming from. Seeing them in daylight made me feel sick. The night before, I could still pretend maybe the sound was something else. But those marks were proof that something had physically touched my door. I stood there looking at them, and all I could think was that something had been outside my room for 10 or 20 minutes, clawing at the door while I sat on the other side. I still do not know what made those scratches. I do not know if it was the spirit of the girl, something connected to her, or something darker pretending to be many things at once. In that house, it was hard to know what was what. The energy felt too ugly to be just a sad ghost. It felt like whatever was there enjoyed fear. It knew how to push people, how to make them doubt themselves, how to make the house feel unsafe, even in the rooms that were supposed to belong to us. There was another story from that house that was a little more fun, or at least less terrifying from my side of it. It involved my dad. My dad did not believe in the paranormal at all. Not at first. He treated the whole thing like a joke. No matter what the rest of us experienced, he would make fun of it. He would say things like, "If you're really here, why don't you prove it?" Then, when nothing happened right away, he would laugh and say, "See? There's nothing." He poked fun at it all the time. He acted like we were being dramatic, like the house was just old and we were making stories out of normal sounds. I think part of him wanted to keep control of the situation. If he admitted the house was haunted, then he would also have to admit that his family was living with something he could not protect us from. Making jokes was probably easier. but I guess whatever was in the house got tired of him. For a few months, something started happening to him at dinner, at least once a week. When my dad would get a plate of food and start walking toward the table, he would make it about halfway there, and then something would slap the plate out of his hand. Not drop it, not slip, slap it. The plate would suddenly fly from his grip like an invisible hand had smacked it. Food would go everywhere. It never happened when he was alone, which is important. It happened when other people could see it. It was like whatever was doing it wanted witnesses, so my dad could not just say he had been clumsy. It made a point of embarrassing him in front of us. The first time, maybe he tried to brush it off. People drop things. Plates slip. Accidents happen. But then it happened again, and again, and again. Always the same kind of thing. He would be carrying his dinner, and something would knock it from his hands before he reached the table. For a while, it became this strange, awful routine. My dad, the man who made jokes about the ghost, could not get through dinner without the house answering him. The rest of us knew exactly what it looked like. It looked like the haunting was tired of being mocked. It looked like it had chosen a harmless but very clear way to say, "I am here." I think that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. It is one thing to hear other people's stories and laugh. It is another thing when your dinner keeps getting slapped out of your hands by something no one can see. And because it never happened when he was alone, he could not fully hide behind the idea that he was just being clumsy. There were witnesses. We saw the plates leave his hands. After a few months of this, he finally gave in. He apologized for making so many ghost jokes. After that, he got to enjoy the rest of his dinners on the first try. That sounds funny, and compared to the scratching on my door, it kind of is. But even that story has a dark edge when I really think about it. The thing in the house understood mockery. It understood my dad's jokes. It reacted to them. It punished him in a way that was public enough to make a point, but not dangerous enough to look like an attack. That means it was aware. It was listening. And that is the part of haunting stories that people do not always think about. A noise in the walls is scary. A door moving is scary. But when something responds to what you say, when it seems to understand your attitude and choose a reaction, that is a different level of fear. That means you are not just dealing with some leftover energy. You are dealing with something that knows you are there. That house knew us. It knew where we slept. It knew which rooms scared us. It knew when my dad joked. It knew how to make friends uncomfortable enough that they did not want to come back. It knew how to leave marks on a bedroom door. It knew how to make a family feel like they were never fully alone. I have tried to think about that house logically over the years. It was old. Old houses make noises. Families tell stories. Fear can spread from person to person. If you tell someone a house is haunted, they may start feeling things even if nothing is there. I understand all of that. But explanations like that do not cover the scratches on my door. They do not cover the blood splatter under the wallpaper. They do not cover the deadbolt on the outside of the bedroom door. They do not cover the way people who knew nothing about the house still felt the heavy darkness inside it. And they do not cover the fact that every single person in my family had something happen. For me, the scratching will always be the worst memory. I can still hear it if I think about it too long. Slow claws dragging down the wood. Long pauses. Then, more scratching. The fear that something was about to break in. The dog sleeping beside me. My parents asleep in another room. The feeling that I was completely alone with whatever was outside my door. Then the morning light. And the scratches waiting there as proof. I still wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door. I am glad I did not. I do not like imagining what might have been standing there. Maybe nothing visible. Maybe something awful. Maybe the hallway would have been empty, and that would have been worse in its own way. But I know one thing for sure. Something was on the other side of that door that night, and it wanted me to know it was there. That house had darkness in it before we arrived, and I do not think we ever fully understood what it was. Maybe it came from what happened to that girl. Maybe the house held on to the pain and fear of what she went through. Maybe something else was already there and used that tragedy like an open door. I cannot say. But I know the place was not right. Some homes feel warm when you walk into them. Some feel empty. That house felt like it was waiting, and when it wanted your attention, it always found a way to get it. This happened when I was around 7 or 8 years old, and even though many years have passed, I can still remember the fear I felt that day. Some memories from childhood become weak over time. Faces change, rooms seem smaller than they once did, and details disappear. But this memory has always stayed sharp in my mind. I still remember the sound of the doorbell, the man standing outside, and the way he kept hitting the door after I locked it. At that age, I was often home alone after school. My mother worked long hours during the day, and my older brother was usually outside somewhere with his friends. Back then, leaving a child home alone did not feel as unusual as it would now. Our apartment building was familiar to us, and my mother knew many of the people who lived nearby. I had also been taught not to leave the apartment and not to open the door for strangers. Most afternoons followed the same routine. I would come home from school, take off my shoes, place my backpack near the wall, and find something to eat. Sometimes I watched television. Sometimes I played with toys or looked through old magazines. The apartment could feel very quiet, but I was used to it. My grandmother and my little cousin often came to visit after school. They did not come every day, but they visited often enough that I expected them. My cousin was younger than me and had a very specific way of letting me know that he was outside. Our apartment had a regular wooden front door, but there was also a metal security gate outside it. The metal door made a lot of noise when someone knocked on it. My cousin loved making noise, so he never simply pressed the doorbell once and waited like a normal person. He had his own pattern. He would press the doorbell in a certain rhythm, pause for a moment, and then bang on the metal gate several times. Sometimes he called my name from the hallway, too. I always knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. It became like a secret signal between us. Whenever I heard that pattern, I would run to the door because I knew my grandmother would be standing behind him, probably carrying food or some small treat for me. My cousin would be jumping around impatiently, waiting for me to open the door. That is why I did not feel afraid when I heard the same pattern that afternoon. I had been sitting alone in the apartment, probably watching television, when the doorbell rang. The sound came in the exact rhythm my cousin always used. Then someone banged on the metal gate. I remember smiling and getting up quickly. I did not stop to think. I did not look carefully through the peephole first. In my mind, there was no question about who was outside. It had to be my cousin and my grandmother. I walked to the front door and opened it. The moment I did, I knew something was wrong. My cousin was not there. My grandmother was not there. Instead, a man I had never seen before was standing in the hallway. He was extremely tall, or at least he seemed that way to me. I was only a small child, so most adults looked tall, but this man seemed much larger than normal. He stood close to the metal gate, filling most of the space outside the door. I do not remember every detail of his face. I wish I did, but fear has a strange effect on memory. I remember his height more than anything else. I remember looking up at him and feeling very small. He did not look like anyone who lived in the building. I had never seen him in the elevators, near the entrance, or in the hallways. After living in that building for years, I knew many familiar faces, even if I did not know everyone's name. This man was completely unfamiliar. He spoke calmly at first. He said he was there to check the apartment. I did not understand what he meant. He may have used the word inspection, or he may have said he needed to look at something inside. I was young, and I did not fully understand adult jobs or building rules. I knew that people sometimes came to repair things, but my mother usually knew about it beforehand. No one had ever come to inspect our apartment while I was home alone. In fact, we had lived in that building for many years, and I do not remember anyone ever arriving without warning to check the apartment. Still, I did not immediately realize that the situation was dangerous. Children often believe adults because adults are supposed to know what they are doing. If a grown man speaks with confidence and says he is there for an official reason, a child may accept it without asking many questions. The man asked whether my mother was home. Without thinking, I told him no. As soon as the word left my mouth, I felt a small warning in my mind. I had been taught not to tell strangers that I was alone, but I answered him automatically. Then he asked whether anyone else was home. Again, I told him no. That second answer made the danger feel more real. I had just told a complete stranger that my mother was not home, my brother was not home, and there was no other adult inside the apartment. I had told him that I was alone. Something in my mind finally clicked. Maybe it was the way he looked at me after I answered. Maybe it was the fact that he asked the second question so quickly. Maybe I simply remembered my mother's warnings. Whatever the reason, I suddenly understood that I had made a serious mistake. I tried to fix it. I quickly added that my family was already on their way home. I told him they would be there very soon. I hoped that would make him leave. It did not. The man said he would only need a few minutes. He asked if he could come inside and do the inspection before they arrived. His voice was still controlled, but he was more direct now. He did not step away from the door. He stood there waiting for me to open the metal gate. I knew I should not let him in, but I was scared of being rude to an adult. That may sound strange, but children are often taught to listen to grown-ups. We are told not to argue, not to interrupt, and not to behave badly. At the same time, every part of me was warning me not to open the gate. I told him I had to call my mother first. I do not remember exactly how he reacted. I think he told me it was unnecessary. He may have repeated that the inspection would only take a few minutes. But I refused to open the metal gate. I closed the wooden door enough to separate myself from him, though I do not think I locked it immediately. Then I hurried to the phone. This happened before children carried cell phones everywhere, so I had to use the phone inside the apartment. My hands were probably shaking when I called my mother at work. When she answered, I told her there was a man outside who said he needed to inspect the apartment. I asked if she knew who he was. Her reaction was immediate. She said no one was supposed to be there. She told me not to let him inside. She told me to shut the door, lock everything, and stay away from him. The fear in her voice made the situation real in a way it had not been before. Until then, part of me had still wondered whether the man was telling the truth. Maybe he really did work for the building. Maybe I was making a big deal out of nothing. But my mother knew nothing about any inspection. That meant the man had lied. I ended the call and went back toward the front door. I did not explain anything to him. I did not tell him my mother had said no. I did not want to continue the conversation. I simply pushed the door shut as hard as I could and locked it. The moment the lock clicked into place, the man changed. He began banging on the door. The first was so loud that I jumped away. He hit the metal gate and the wooden door, making the entire entrance shake. The sound echoed through the apartment and the hallway outside. Then he started yelling. He told me to open the door. He said he needed to come inside. He may have repeated that he was there for an inspection, but his voice no longer sounded calm or professional. It sounded angry. A real building worker would not act that way toward a frightened child. A real worker would not keep hitting the door after being told no. I knew then that I had been right not to let him in. I also understood that I was trapped inside the apartment with no adult there to protect me. I did not know whether the locks were strong enough. I did not know whether he had tools. I did not know if he could break the door or somehow open it. I was only 7 or 8 years old, and my mind began imagining every possible danger. I ran away from the entrance and looked for something I could use to defend myself. Our apartment did not have weapons, and even if it had, I probably would not have known how to use them. I needed something small enough for a child to hold. I found a can of my mother's hairspray. Then I found a lighter. I had probably seen something on television about using hairspray and a flame together. In my young mind, I thought I had created a powerful weapon. I imagined that if the man found me, I could spray the hairspray toward the lighter and create fire. Looking back, it was extremely dangerous. I could have burned myself or set the apartment on fire, but at the time, it made me feel slightly less helpless. I held the lighter in one hand and the hairspray in the other. Then I searched for a place to hide. I did not hide under the bed because I thought that would be the first place someone would look. I did not use a closet for the same reason. Even as a child, I was thinking carefully. I found a small space that was difficult to see and even harder to reach. I squeezed myself into it and tried to become as quiet as possible. From my hiding place, I could still hear the man at the door. Bang, bang, bang. Each hit made my body tighten. He kept yelling for me to open the door. His voice moved between anger and false calmness. Sometimes, he sounded demanding. Other times, he acted as if nothing was wrong and told me he only needed a few minutes. That made it worse. He wanted me to believe him again. He wanted me to come back to the door. I stayed hidden. I held the lighter and hairspray so tightly that my fingers hurt. I stared toward the entrance of my hiding place, expecting the man to appear at any second. The banging continued. When you are a frightened child, time moves differently. A few seconds can feel like several minutes. Half an hour can feel like an entire day. The man seemed to stay outside forever. Every time the noise stopped, I thought he might be trying to open the lock quietly. I imagined him using a tool to get inside. I imagined hearing the door open and his footsteps moving through the apartment. Then, the banging would start again. I did not know whether I should call my mother again. I was afraid that moving from my hiding place would make noise. I was afraid the man might somehow hear me talking on the phone. I also thought about calling the police, but I was young and scared. I may not have known exactly what to say. I also worried that the man would get inside before anyone arrived, so I stayed where I was. I tried not to cry loudly. I remember listening to every sound in the apartment. The refrigerator made its usual humming noise. Pipes moved inside the walls. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. Each normal sound made me jump. The man kept knocking and shouting. I wondered why none of the neighbors came outside. Maybe they were not home. Maybe they heard him, but were afraid to get involved. Maybe the thick walls made the noise less clear than it seemed from inside our apartment. I wished my grandmother would arrive. I wished my brother would come home. I wished my mother could suddenly appear and make the man leave. But no one came. At some point, the banging stopped. I did not move. I waited for him to start again. For several minutes, there was complete silence. That silence frightened me more than the noise. I imagined him standing outside without moving, waiting for me to believe he had left. Maybe he thought I would unlock the door and look into the hallway. I stayed hidden. I do not know how long I waited before I finally moved. It may have been 10 minutes. It may have been much longer. I slowly crawled out of the small space, still holding the hairspray and lighter. I moved quietly through the apartment and stopped far from the front door. I listened. Nothing. I did not open the door. I did not even look through the peephole right away because I was afraid his face would suddenly appear on the other side. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to look. The hallway was empty. The man was gone. I felt relief, but I did not feel safe. He could have been hiding near the stairs or the elevator. He could have been waiting around the corner. He knew I was alone, and he knew which apartment I lived in. I kept the door locked and returned to my hiding place. I remained there until I was sure a family member had come home. I do not remember whether my mother arrived first or whether someone else came to stay with me, but I remember how safe I felt when I finally heard a familiar voice. I told my mother everything that had happened. I told her how the man had used my cousin's special doorbell pattern. I told her what he said about inspecting the apartment. I told her that he asked whether anyone else was home. I told her how he kept hitting the door after I locked it. My mother was horrified. The most disturbing part was the doorbell pattern. It was not a normal ring. My cousin had a very specific way of pressing the bell and banging on the gate. The man copied it closely enough to fool me. That meant he may have heard my cousin doing it before. Maybe he had watched our apartment. Maybe he had been in the hallway on another day when my grandmother and cousin came to visit. Maybe he noticed that I always opened the door quickly after hearing that pattern. It is also possible that the similarity was only a coincidence. But I have never believed that. The man did not simply ring once. He used the exact kind of signal that made me think someone familiar was outside. He wanted me to open the door without checking. And it worked. If we had not had the metal security gate, the story might have ended very differently. The wooden door opened, but the locked metal gate remained between us. He could see me and speak to me, but he could not immediately enter. Without that gate, he might have pushed his way inside the moment I opened the door. That thought still frightens me. I also think about how easily I answered his questions. Is your mother home? No. Is anyone else home? No. I gave him the exact information he wanted. I was lucky that some part of my mind recognized the danger before I unlocked the gate. I was lucky that I called my mother. I was lucky that she answered. I was lucky the locks held. The man stayed outside for what felt like forever. Looking back, I think it was around 30 minutes. That is a long time for someone to stand outside a child's apartment, banging on the door and demanding to be let inside. A person with innocent intentions would have left immediately. A real inspector would have contacted the building manager or returned when an adult was home. He did not do either of those things. He tried to pressure a frightened child into opening the door. I never saw him again. As far as I know, he never returned to our apartment. I do not know whether anyone in the building recognized him, or whether he tried the same thing with another family. We lived there for more than 20 years, and no one ever came to perform an unannounced inspection like that. That alone tells me he was lying. Sometimes I wonder what he planned to do if I let him in. I do not like thinking about it for long. Maybe he wanted to steal something. Maybe he thought an empty apartment would be easy to rob. Maybe his intentions were much worse. The fact that he stayed for so long suggests that he was determined to enter. He knew I was a child. he knew I was alone, and instead of leaving, he became angry when I locked the door. For years after that, I became nervous whenever the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Even when I heard my cousin's familiar pattern, I checked carefully before opening the door. I never again assumed that a familiar knock meant a familiar person. That day taught me something important at a very young age. A person can copy a voice, a knock, or a doorbell pattern. They can pretend to be a worker, a neighbor, or someone sent by your family. The safest thing is to check first. I know some people might think I was foolish for opening the door or telling him I was alone. I was a child. I trusted the pattern I knew, and I believed an adult who spoke as if he had a reason to be there. What matters is that I eventually listened to the warning in my mind. I made a mistake, but I corrected it before it was too late. I still think about the lighter and hairspray sometimes. It was a ridiculous plan, and it probably would have hurt me more than him. But when I was hiding with those things in my hands, I truly believed I was ready to protect myself. I was terrified, but I did not open the door. No matter how loudly he shouted, I stayed hidden. Eventually, he gave up and left. That was the most frightened I had ever been in my life. Even now, the sound of someone repeatedly hitting a metal door takes me back to that afternoon. I remember the empty apartment, the locked entrance, and the tall stranger standing outside. Most of all, I remember how close I came to letting him in. If I had opened that metal gate, I do not know what would have happened. I only know that I might not be here to tell this story. When I first started my new job, I had not moved to the area yet. The job had begun sooner than I expected, and I still had a few things to finish before I could leave my old place for good. Because of that, I needed somewhere to stay for the first few nights. I did not want to make a long drive every morning, so I booked a room in a hotel close to my new workplace. It seemed like the easiest choice. The hotel was new, clean, and only a short distance from the office. It had opened earlier that same year, and everything about it still looked fresh. The paint on the walls was bright and smooth. The carpets had no stains. The furniture still looked like it had just come out of the boxes. Even the elevator had that new building smell, a mixture of clean metal, fresh paint, and something slightly chemical. The staff seemed proud of the place. When I checked in, the woman at the front desk told me the hotel had only been open for a few months. She smiled as she handed me the key card and said I was lucky because everything was still brand new. At the time, that made me feel better. Old hotels sometimes have strange sounds. Pipes knock. Floors creak. Walls carry voices from other rooms. A new hotel seemed safer and more comfortable. I thought I would sleep well, go to work in the morning, and leave after 3 days without remembering much about the place. The room looked exactly the way I expected. There was a large bed, a desk, a small television, and a bathroom near the entrance. The bathroom was simple, but clean. It had a sink, a mirror, and a white bathtub with a shower above it. Nothing about the room felt unusual when I first entered. I unpacked a few clothes, set my alarm, and spent the evening preparing for work. Starting a new job is stressful, even when everything goes well. I kept thinking about the people I had met that day, the names I was trying to remember, and all the new responsibilities I would have. By the time I got into bed, I was exhausted. I turned off the lights and expected to fall asleep quickly. I do not remember exactly when the dream began. In the dream, I was lying inside a bathtub. At first, I did not know where I was. My eyes were open, but everything around me seemed dark and unclear. Slowly, the shape of the bathroom became visible. I could feel the hard surface of the tub against my back. My head rested near the edge, and my arms were down by my sides. I tried to move, but nothing happened. I could not lift my hands. I could not turn my head. I could not sit up. It felt as if my body no longer belonged to me. I could see and hear, but I had no control over anything else. I tried to call for help, but my mouth would not move. Then I heard someone crying. A woman was beside the bathtub. I could not see her clearly at first, but I knew she was there. Her crying was deep and broken, the kind of crying that comes from something worse than ordinary sadness. She was not simply upset. She sounded destroyed. The woman leaned close to me and asked why I had done it. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Why did you do this?" I did not understand what she meant, but I felt terrible guilt. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I wanted to explain myself. But I could not speak. She kept crying, and then she said that now I could never come back. She told me nothing would ever be okay again. Her words filled me with a kind of fear I had never felt before. It was not the fear of being injured or trapped. It was something much heavier. It was the fear of knowing that something permanent had happened. There was no way to undo it. There was no second chance. There was no way to return to the life that existed before. In the dream, I suddenly understood that I had crossed some final line. Whatever I had done could never be changed. The woman kept asking me why. I tried harder to answer her. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." The words were inside my mind, but my body would not obey me. The panic grew stronger. I could feel it rising through me, even though I could not move. It was like being trapped behind my own eyes. I knew I needed to speak before it was too late, but I also knew it was already too late. That was the most frightening part. The panic became so intense that it finally woke me. I sat up in bed, breathing hard. For a few seconds, I did not know where I was. The hotel room was dark, and the unfamiliar shapes around me made the fear worse. Then I remembered. I was in the new hotel. I had started a new job. It had only been a dream. I turned on the lamp beside the bed and looked around the room. Everything was normal. The door was locked. The curtains were closed. The television was off. I could still hear the woman crying in my head. I checked the time and saw that it was still early in the morning. I had only been asleep for a few hours. I got out of bed and walked toward the bathroom. The light was off, and for some reason I did not want to enter. I stood in the doorway and looked at the bathtub. It was white, clean, and empty. There was nothing frightening about it, but the sight of it made my stomach tighten. I closed the bathroom door and went back to bed. It took a long time to fall asleep again. The next morning I felt tired, but tried not to think too much about the dream. New jobs can create stress. Sleeping in an unfamiliar place can also cause strange dreams. That was the explanation I gave myself. I went to work and focused on learning everything I needed to know. The day was busy enough to keep my mind occupied. By evening, the dream seemed less important. I returned to the hotel, ate something, and spent some time watching television. I was still uncomfortable when I looked toward the bathroom, but I told myself I was being foolish. It had only been a nightmare. That night I went to sleep. The dream came back. Once again, I was lying inside the bathtub. Once again, I could not move. The sobbing woman was beside me. She asked me why I had done it. She told me I could never come back. She said nothing would ever be okay again. The same terrible feeling of finality returned. In the dream, I knew this was not a mistake that could be repaired. I had done something that separated me from everything and everyone. I tried to apologize, but I could not speak. The panic became unbearable. I woke up gasping for air. This time, I turned on every light in the room. I sat on the bed and stared at the closed bathroom door. The dream had not simply been similar. It had been almost exactly the same. The same bathtub. The same woman. The same words. The same helpless feeling. I wondered whether the dream was connected to the room. Maybe I had seen something in the bathroom earlier without noticing it. Maybe the bathtub had made me think about accidents or death. But there was nothing unusual about the room. It was new. The entire hotel was new. No one could have died there because the building had only recently been completed. At least, that was what I assumed. I considered asking to change rooms, but I felt embarrassed. I could imagine how it would sound. I had a bad dream about the bathtub, and now I wanted another room. I decided I could manage one more night. During my second day at work, I had trouble concentrating. I kept hearing the woman's voice in my memory. Why did you do this? Now you can never come back. Nothing will ever be okay again. The words sounded personal, but they did not feel directed at me. That was difficult to explain. In the dream, I was the person in the bathtub. The woman spoke to me, and I felt the guilt and fear as though they belonged to me. But after waking, it felt like I had been inside someone else's memory. That evening, when I returned to the hotel, I stopped at the front desk. I asked one of the employees what had been on the property before the hotel was built. He looked surprised by the question. I tried to sound casual. I said the area looked older than the hotel and that I was curious about the history. The employee told me there had been some old houses there before construction began. He said several families had lived on the land, but they had been relocated when the property was purchased for development. That answer stayed with me. I asked whether anything unusual had happened in those houses. He said he did not know. Another employee nearby joined the conversation and said the houses had been in poor condition. According to her, the whole area had been cleared before the hotel was built. Neither of them mentioned a death. I thanked them and went upstairs. Inside my room, I looked around differently. The walls were new, the carpet was new, the furniture was new, but the land beneath the building was not. The hotel had not always been there. People had lived in that exact area before the rooms, hallways, and elevators were built. I began wondering whether the bathtub in my dream had belonged to one of those old houses. I told myself I was making connections that were not real. Dreams can repeat when you keep thinking about them. By asking about the property, I was probably making the fear worse. Still, I did not want to sleep. I stayed awake much later than usual. I watched television until I could barely keep my eyes open. I left the lamp beside the bed on and avoided looking toward the bathroom. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep. The dream returned for the third time. I was in the bathtub. My body would not move. The woman was crying beside me. Her grief was even worse than before. She kept asking why I had done it. She said I could never come back. She said nothing would ever be all right again. I felt the same panic. But this time there was something else. I felt weak. My arms seemed cold and heavy. I had the terrible sense that my life was leaving me. The woman reached toward me, but I could not tell whether she touched me. I tried to say I was sorry. I tried with everything I had. Nothing came out. I wanted to tell her I had made a mistake. I wanted to tell her I had changed my mind. But it was too late. The feeling of regret was overwhelming. It did not feel like ordinary fear. It felt like the final understanding of someone who had made a choice and only realized the true cost after it could no longer be changed. I woke up crying. For a few seconds, I still felt unable to move. Then, I threw the blanket aside and stood up. I did not go near the bathroom. I packed my things, even though it was still dark outside. I had planned to check out later that morning anyway, but I wanted to be ready to leave as soon as possible. I sat near the window and waited for sunrise. That third dream changed something for me. I no longer believed it was caused only by stress. The details were too clear and too consistent. The woman's words were always the same. The grief felt too real. The sense of regret did not feel like something my own mind had created. After I left the hotel, I began searching for information about the property. At first, I only looked online. I searched for the hotel address, old news reports, property records, and anything connected to the houses that had stood there before. It took time to find useful information. The hotel itself was too new, so most search results were advertisements, booking pages, and business listings. I changed the search and looked for older addresses in the same area. Eventually, I found references to the homes that had been removed. Then, I found a local report. A little more than a year before my stay, a teenage girl had died in one of those houses. She had taken her own life by cutting her wrists in the bathtub. Her mother had found her. I remember staring at the screen for a long time. The report did not include every detail, but it included enough. The location was approximately where the hotel now stood. The timing matched. The bathtub matched. The crying woman matched. The words from the dream suddenly made sense. Why did you do this? Now you can never come back. Nothing will ever be okay again. I thought about the mother finding her daughter. I imagined the shock, the grief, and the desperate wish to undo what had happened. I thought about the girl lying in the bathtub, unable to speak. Maybe she had regretted her decision in the final moments. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe the dream had shown me those last moments again and again. I did not know what to believe. Before that experience, I was not someone who believed strongly in ghosts or spirits. I thought most supernatural stories had normal explanations. Strange noises came from old pipes. Shadows came from headlights. Dreams came from stress, fear, and memory. I still believe many strange experiences can be explained that way. But I had known nothing about the girl. I did not know houses had stood there before the hotel. I did not know someone had died in a bathtub near that location. No one at the hotel had told me. I had no reason to dream about a sobbing mother speaking to a person who could not move. The connection was too specific for me to ignore. I tried to find another explanation. Maybe I had heard the story somewhere without remembering it. Maybe it had been mentioned in local news, and my mind had stored it without my awareness. But I was new to the area. The death had happened before I arrived. I had never searched for the property before staying there. I also wondered whether the hotel bathroom had been built in the same place as the bathroom in the old house. I could not confirm that. The hotel was a completely different structure. The room may not have been directly above the old bathtub. But perhaps the exact position did not matter. Maybe something remained connected to the land. Maybe strong emotions leave something behind. Maybe the girl's fear and the mother's grief had been so powerful that they became attached to that place. I do not know. The experience did not suddenly turn me into someone who believes every ghost story. I still question things. I still look for ordinary explanations. But I no longer believe we understand everything about existence. There may be parts of life, death, memory, and consciousness that we cannot see or measure. Maybe the dream was a message. Maybe it was a memory that did not belong to me. Maybe something in that place wanted another person to understand what had happened. The part that still affects me most is the feeling of regret. In the dream, I knew the decision was permanent. I knew I wanted to take it back. I knew I wanted to tell the woman I was sorry. But my body would not move, and my voice would not work. That feeling was stronger than any ordinary nightmare. It felt real. It felt lived. For years afterward, I thought about the teenage girl. I wondered what had happened in her life before that night. I wondered what pain had made her believe there was no other choice. I also wondered whether, in the final moments, she realized she wanted to live. I will never know. I have never stayed at that hotel again. I do not know whether other guests have had similar dreams. I considered contacting the hotel, but I did not know what I would say. Telling them that a former guest repeatedly dreamed about a death that happened before the building existed would probably not lead anywhere. The hotel is still new in my memory, with bright walls, clean carpets, and polished furniture. That is what makes the experience so disturbing. People often expect haunted places to be old. They imagine abandoned houses, damaged hospitals, dark basements, or buildings with long histories. But buildings can be replaced. Land remains. A new wall does not erase what happened in the same space. Fresh paint does not cover memory. A clean white bathtub can still remind something of the one that stood there before. I went into that hotel believing it had no history because it had only recently been built. I was wrong. The structure was new, but the place was not. Something terrible had happened there only a little more than a year earlier. A young life had ended. A mother had found her daughter. Then, the house was removed. The family was relocated, and a hotel was built over the area. Most guests would never know. They would check in, sleep, shower, and leave. Maybe nothing unusual would happen to them. Maybe I was the only person who had those dreams. Or maybe others had them too, and never told anyone. I still do not know whether I believe in ghosts in the usual sense. I do not know whether a spirit stood beside my bed or entered my thoughts. But I believe something happened that I cannot fully explain. For 3 nights, I experienced the same scene. I felt someone else's fear. I heard a mother's grief. I felt the terrible certainty that a final choice could not be undone. Then, I discovered that, in almost the same place, a teenage girl had died in a bathtub and had been found by her mother. That knowledge changed the way I see the world. I no longer think everything around us is as simple as it appears. A place may hold more than walls and furniture. A dream may be more than random images. And death may not be the complete end of a person's presence. There may be feelings, memories, or parts of us that remain after the body is gone. I cannot prove any of that. I only know what happened to me. I checked into a brand new hotel expecting 3 quiet nights before starting a new life in a new town. Instead, every night, I found myself inside a bathtub, unable to move, listening to a woman cry and ask why I had done something that could never be undone. The dream stopped as soon as I left the hotel. It has never returned. That may be the strangest part of all. This happened about 6 years ago, on the night after the 4th of July. Technically, it was already July 5th because it was close to 3 in the morning. But none of us were thinking about the date by that point. We were only thinking about using the last of the fireworks before someone's parents found them, or before we decided it was too late and gave up. I grew up on the north shore of Long Island, close to the Sound. The land near the water is much hillier than people expect. There are steep slopes, narrow trails, sandy cliffs, patches of thick brush, and long areas of woods that seem much larger once you are inside them. The place where we wanted to set off the fireworks was not directly behind anyone's house. We had to walk somewhere between 1/4 of a mile and 1/2 a mile along the side of what I can only describe as a sand dune mixed with a cliff. It was a strange area where the land dropped sharply toward the beach on one side, while thick woods, stretched away on the other. During the day, the walk was not too bad. At night, it felt completely different. The trail was narrow enough that we had to walk in a line. On one side, there was some low brush followed by a drop of around 100 feet toward the beach and the dark water below. On the other side, there were deep woods that eventually connected to a large state park. Those woods went back for miles. I cannot say the exact distance, but it had to be at least 2 or 3 miles of trees, uneven ground, old trails, and thick plants. There were parts of the woods that people rarely entered, especially at night. During the day, you could hear birds, insects, and sometimes people walking dogs on the park trails. At 3 in the morning, it was just black. My friends and I had walked out to a clearing where we could safely shoot the fireworks without being too close to the houses. There were several of us, all young enough to think that being outside at 3 in the morning with fireworks was a good idea. We had flashlights on our phones, but no proper equipment. None of us had expected to need anything more than that. We knew the trail well enough, and the night was clear. The fireworks had been leftovers from the night before. Nothing huge, mostly small rockets, firecrackers, and a few larger ones that shot colored sparks into the sky. We stayed out there longer than we planned. Every time we thought we were finished, someone found another firework in a bag or pocket. We would light it, run back, and watch it explode over the sound. The flashes reflected on the water below us. For a second at a time, the entire beach became visible. The dark waves, the cliff, and the trees would appear in bright red, green, or white light before disappearing again. It was fun, but the explosions made it impossible to hear anything else. That detail bothered me later. While we were setting off the fireworks, someone could have been standing nearby in the trees and we would never have known. By the time we finished, the air smelled like smoke and burnt paper. Small pieces of firework wrappers were scattered around the clearing. Our ears were ringing, slightly, and all of us were tired. It was close to 3 in the morning when we finally started walking back. On the way to the clearing, the cliff and beach had been on our left, with the woods on our right. Now that we had turned around, the beach and the drop were on our right, while the deep woods were on our left. That meant the darkness beside us felt even closer. We formed a loose line along the narrow path. Some of us were talking about the fireworks, and someone was probably making jokes about how angry our parents would be if they knew what time it was. The mood was relaxed. We were not afraid. We had grown up around those woods. We knew there were deer, raccoons, foxes, and other animals moving through them at night. Hearing something in the leaves was normal. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Our phone lights moved across the ground in front of us. They were not very bright, so we could only see a small section of the path at a time. Beyond that circle of light, everything was darkness. The sound was almost invisible below the cliff, but we could hear water moving against the shore. The noise was soft and steady. The woods were quiet. Then we heard something moving in the leaves. It came from our left, somewhere inside the trees. There was a quick rustling sound followed by the snap of a small branch. None of us reacted much. Someone said it was probably a deer. That made sense. There were plenty of deer in the area, and they often moved close to the trails. At night, you sometimes heard them before you saw them. We kept walking. The conversation continued, although it became slightly quieter. I think we were all listening to the woods without admitting it. We took around 10 more steps. Then we heard the sound again. This time, it was closer. The leaves moved rapidly, and another stick snapped under something's weight. It did not sound as if an animal was running away from us. It sounded as if something was moving in the same direction we were moving. Someone behind me asked if we had heard that. We all said yes. Another friend told us not to worry. He said it was probably still a deer walking through the woods. That was possible, but something about the timing felt wrong. The noise had stopped when we stopped. When we began walking again, it moved again. We were young, but we were not stupid. All of us understood what that might mean. The thing in the woods could be following us. We did not discuss it. No one wanted to be the first person to say it out loud. Instead, we all became quiet and started walking a little faster. The path was too narrow to run safely. If someone slipped near the cliffside, they could fall through the brush and down the steep slope. So we increased our speed without breaking into a run. Our phone lights bounced across the sand and roots in front of us. The faster we walked, the harder it became to see where we were stepping. For several seconds, there was no noise from the woods. I began to relax. Maybe the animal had changed direction. Maybe we had imagined that it was following us. Then the leaves moved again. The sound was much closer than before. It was only a few feet from the edge of the trail. Every one of us stopped talking. I could hear our shoes scraping against the dirt. I could hear someone breathing heavily behind me. Whatever was inside the woods was matching our speed. We walked faster. The noise continued beside us. It was not moving randomly anymore. We could hear the clear rhythm of footsteps through leaves and small branches. The steps were too controlled to sound like a deer. A deer would have moved in quick jumps or run deeper into the woods after hearing us. This thing seemed to know exactly where we were. It stayed hidden just beyond the reach of our phone lights. The woods on our left were thick. Even with the lights pointed directly into them, we could only see tree trunks, branches, and patches of leaves. We could not see what was making the sound. That was the worst part. If we had seen a deer, everything would have been fine. Instead, we heard something walking next to us in the darkness. We continued for another 20 feet. The sound moved closer until it seemed to be right beside the path. One of my friends whispered that we should run. Another told him to wait because the trail was dangerous. Then the movement stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. We stopped too. All of us pointed our phone lights toward the trees. The beams were weak and unsteady. They moved across branches and bushes, but we saw nothing. My heart was beating hard by then. I remember thinking that if it was an animal, it might suddenly jump out. If it was a person, I could not understand why anyone would be hiding in those woods at 3 a.m. Before any of us could decide what to do, a man stepped onto the trail directly in front of us. He came out so suddenly that all of us moved backward. He had been only a few feet away, hidden in the trees. The first thing I noticed was how completely wrong he looked for the place. He was not dressed like a hiker. He was not wearing old clothes, hunting clothes, or anything practical for walking through deep woods at night. He wore a brown pinstripe suit. It looked like something from another time. The jacket and pants matched, and he also wore a matching brown top hat. In one hand, he carried a black briefcase. He had round glasses that reminded me of the kind Theodore Roosevelt wore in old photographs. For a second, none of us said anything. The light from our phones moved over his body and face. Because the beams were weak, I could not see him clearly enough to remember every detail. He looked as if he was in his 50s, but it was hard to tell. His skin looked pale in the phone light. His clothes appeared clean, which made no sense after he had been moving through bushes and trees. There were no leaves on his suit. There was no dirt on his shoes that I could see. He stood in the middle of the narrow path, blocking our way. Behind us was the clearing and the long trail back in the opposite direction. To our right was the steep drop toward the beach. To our left were the woods he had just stepped out of. There was nowhere easy to go around him. The man looked at us calmly. He did not seem out of breath. He did not appear surprised to see us. He smiled slightly, as if meeting a group of teenagers in the middle of the night was completely normal. Then, he spoke. "Well, good evening, boys. How are you tonight?" His voice was polite. That somehow made him more frightening. If he had shouted or acted drunk, we might have understood the situation. We could have assumed he was some strange local man who had been wandering through the park. Instead, he spoke like someone greeting guests at a formal event. He was standing in the woods at 3 in the morning, dressed in a pinstripe suit and top hat, carrying a briefcase. Nothing about it made sense. I do not remember anyone answering him. There may have been a second when we all looked at each other. Then we ran. We did not make a plan. We did not discuss whether we should pass him or turn around. We simply moved. Some of us pushed past him on the narrow trail. Others may have gone around closer to the cliffside. Everything happened too quickly for me to remember clearly. The moment we were past him, we ran as fast as we could. The path was dangerous, but fear made us ignore that. Our phone lights jumped wildly over the ground. We nearly crashed into one another several times. I could hear someone behind me saying not to look back. I did not. None of us looked back. I expected to hear the man running after us. I expected to hear leaves moving or footsteps on the path. For the first few seconds, I heard nothing except our own shoes and breathing. Then I thought I heard something from behind us. It may have been another step. It may have been a branch breaking. Or it may have been my imagination. I did not stop to find out. We ran the entire distance back. By the time we reached the safer area near the houses, we were exhausted. Some of us were coughing from the cold air and smoke. We finally stopped near a streetlight and looked behind us. The trail was empty. The man had not followed us into the open. For several minutes, no one knew what to say. Then, everyone began talking at once. We asked each other if we had all seen the same thing. A brown pinstripe suit, a top hat, round glasses, a black briefcase, an older man standing in the woods. Everyone agreed. That was important because the whole event felt too strange to be real. If I had been alone, I might have convinced myself that I imagined it. But all of us saw him. All of us heard him speak. We tried to come up with normal explanations. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he had been at a costume party. Maybe he was drunk or mentally unwell. Maybe he enjoyed frightening people on the trail. None of those answers explained everything. Why was he inside the woods instead of on the path? Why had he been following us through the leaves? How did he move so close without us seeing him? Why was he carrying a briefcase through deep woods at 3 in the morning? And how had he kept that suit so clean? Someone suggested that he might have been waiting to rob us. That did not seem right either. He did not threaten us or ask for money. He did not try to grab anyone when we passed. He simply greeted us. Another friend joked that he might have been a ghost from the 1800s. None of us laughed very much. We went home soon after that. I did not sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him stepping out of the woods. For the next few days, I thought about the encounter constantly. I searched online for reports of strange people in the state park. I looked for stories about missing persons, old houses, local legends, and people wearing old-fashioned clothes. I did not find anything that clearly explained him. We considered returning during the day to look around. Eventually, a few of us did. In daylight, the path looked normal again. The woods were thick, but not supernatural. We found no briefcase, hat, footprints, or signs that someone had been staying there. The place where the man stepped out was full of bushes and branches. It would have been difficult to walk through while wearing a suit. It would have been nearly impossible to do it without making more noise or damaging the clothes. We looked for another trail hidden behind the brush, but we did not find one. The woods continued back toward the park. Maybe there was a small path we missed. Maybe he knew the area better than we did. Still, it did not explain why he was there. Over the years, the story became something my friends and I brought up whenever we were together. Sometimes we laughed about how fast we ran. Sometimes we argued about small details. One person remembered the hat being darker. Another thought the suit looked black instead of brown. But we all remembered the same important things. The footsteps followed us. The man appeared directly in front of us. He was wearing old-fashioned formal clothes. He had a black briefcase. And he spoke as if he had been expecting us. That last part is what still bothers me. He did not ask who we were or what we were doing there. He did not act surprised. He said, "Well, good evening, boys. How are you tonight?" There was something about the word "well" that made it sound as though he had been waiting for the moment. Maybe I am reading too much into it now. Memory changes with time. Fear can make normal things seem impossible. It is possible that he was only an eccentric man walking through the park after some event. Maybe he heard the fireworks and came to see who was making the noise. But if that was true, why did he hide in the woods and follow us? Why did he not approach the clearing while we were setting them off? He could have called out from a distance. Instead, he moved beside us in the darkness and waited until he was close enough to step directly into our path. The fireworks may have attracted him. That idea is disturbing enough on its own. He might have seen the flashes over the trees and followed the sound. While we stood in the clearing, laughing and looking toward the water, he may have watched us from the woods. When we started walking back, he may have decided to follow. I wonder how long he was there before we first heard him. Maybe he had been close to us the entire time. We only noticed him when he stopped trying to stay quiet. The path has always felt different to me since that night. During the day, I can walk near the area without much trouble. At night, I avoid it. I have no interest in finding out whether he is still there. Sometimes I imagine what might have happened if we had not run. What if one of us had answered him? What if we had said we were fine and asked who he was? Would he have given us a name? Would he have explained why he was carrying a briefcase through the woods? Would he have opened it? That is another detail that bothers me. The briefcase never left his hand. He carried it the way a businessman might carry documents to an office. It seemed heavy and solid. There was no office nearby. There were only woods, a cliff, and the beach. Part of me wishes we had stayed long enough to learn something. A much larger part of me is glad we ran. People often think strange encounters need a dramatic ending. They expect the person to chase you, attack you, disappear, or reveal something impossible. This man did none of those things. He stepped out of the woods. He greeted us politely. We ran away. That is all. But sometimes a lack of explanation is worse than a clear threat. If he had chased us, I could call him dangerous. If he had asked for money, I could call him a robber. If he had been wearing normal clothes, I could call him a lost hiker. Instead, he was simply there, dressed like a man from another time, waiting on a narrow path at 3 a.m. I have replayed the moment many times. I remember the sound of branches breaking closer and closer. I remember the phone lights moving through the trees. I remember the sudden silence before he appeared. Most clearly, I remember his calm voice. "Well, good evening, boys. How are you tonight?" I still have no idea who he was. where he came from, or what he was doing in those woods. I do know one thing. Whatever answer exists, I am not sure I want to find it. I was pregnant when I found out that I was going to have a miscarriage. Even now, it is difficult to explain what that moment felt like. One minute I was thinking about a future that included another baby, and the next I was being told that the pregnancy was over. It was a kind of pain that was both emotional and physical, even before anything had actually happened to my body. I was younger then, and I trusted my doctor completely. I was not a medical professional, and I did not know enough to question what I was being told. When my doctor said that I did not need surgery, I believed her. She told me a D&C was unnecessary. A D&C is a procedure doctors sometimes perform after a miscarriage to remove tissue from inside the uterus. I had heard of it, but I did not fully understand when it was needed or what the risks were if it was not done. My doctor explained that my body should pass everything naturally on its own. I thought she knew what she was doing. Why would I think otherwise? She was the doctor. I was a frightened young woman who had just learned that she had lost a pregnancy. I was trying to understand what was happening while also dealing with the sadness of losing a baby. I did not want surgery if I did not need it. I did not want another medical procedure, more pain, or more time in a hospital. The idea that my body could handle everything naturally sounded better. So I went home and waited. The waiting was terrible. I knew something was going to happen, but I did not know exactly when. I did not know how painful it would be, or how much bleeding was normal. I had been told to expect cramping and bleeding, but those words did not prepare me for what eventually happened. For the next few days, I stayed aware of every feeling in my body. Every small cramp made me wonder if it was starting. Every time I went to the bathroom, I checked for blood. Emotionally, I felt empty and confused. Part of me wanted the process to begin so it could be over. Another part of me did not want it to happen because it made the loss more real. As long as nothing had passed, there was still a strange feeling that the pregnancy had not truly ended, even though I knew it had. Then, a few days later, my body started passing the pregnancy on its own, just as the doctor had said it would. At first, I felt relieved. That may sound strange, but I had been waiting and worrying. When the bleeding began, I thought my body was doing what it was supposed to do. I believed the worst part would soon be over. There was pain, but it seemed manageable. I thought it was normal. I kept reminding myself that the doctor had told me to expect it. I tried to continue with life. At the time, I was married, and one day my husband needed to get his hair cut. I went with him and waited in the car while he went inside. It felt like an ordinary moment in the middle of something painful. He was getting a haircut, and I was sitting alone in the car, waiting for him to finish. I do not remember what I was doing while I waited. I may have been looking at my phone or simply sitting there, lost in my thoughts. I was still bleeding, but I believed everything was under control. Then, the pain hit me. It came suddenly, without warning. It was not like a normal cramp. I had felt menstrual cramps before, and I had already been experiencing pain from the miscarriage. But this was completely different. It felt like something sharp was being pushed deep into my stomach. The pain was shooting and stabbing. It was so strong that it took my breath away. For a moment, I could not think clearly. I bent forward in the car and waited for it to pass. It did not pass. It became worse. I remember thinking that I needed to use the bathroom. At the time, I thought I might need to have a bowel movement. The pressure was so strong that I could not tell exactly where the pain was coming from. I texted my husband and told him to hurry. I needed him to come out immediately. I did not want to go into the salon and explain what was happening in front of everyone. I was embarrassed, scared, and in pain. When he came out, I told him I needed a bathroom right away. We did not have time to drive home. The closest place was a run-down gas station. It was not the kind of place where anyone would want to stop unless they had no choice. The building was old, and the bathroom was probably dirty. Under normal circumstances, I might have waited until we found somewhere cleaner. But I could not wait. As soon as we arrived, I got out of the car and rushed inside. I barely noticed the store or the person working there. All I could think about was reaching the bathroom. I went inside, shut the door, and sat on the toilet. I still believed I needed to have a bowel movement. Then, the blood started. I began passing enormous blood clots. They were not small. They were not anything close to what I had been told to expect. Some of them looked almost as large as cantaloupes. I remember staring down in shock, unable to understand what I was seeing. There was so much blood. It kept coming and coming. Within moments, I realized this was not normal bleeding from a miscarriage. I was hemorrhaging. The blood was leaving my body faster than I could control it. I could not simply clean myself up and walk out of the bathroom. I could not even get off the toilet. Every time I thought the bleeding might be slowing down, more blood came. The pain was still terrible, but fear began to take over. I knew something was very wrong. I had no idea how much blood a person could lose before dying. I did not know how quickly my condition was becoming dangerous. I only knew I could not stand up without blood pouring out of me. My husband waited outside the bathroom. At first, he probably thought I was only sick. I do not think either of us understood how serious the situation was. I was trying to handle it privately. I was scared of making a mess. I was scared of people seeing me. I was scared of what was happening, but I was also embarrassed. That embarrassment seems ridiculous now. When your life is in danger, it should not matter who sees the blood or what anyone thinks. But in that moment, I was still trying to act as if I had control. I did not have control. My body was failing. The bleeding continued for what felt like forever. My husband finally realized how much blood I was losing. He told me we had to go to the hospital. I do not remember every detail of how I got from the gas station bathroom back into the car. I only remember that I was still bleeding. There was no way to stop it. I was bleeding on the way to the hospital and in his car. At that point, I did not care about the car. I did not care about the mess. I was becoming weak, and the fear was growing. The drive to the hospital felt both too fast and too slow. We were moving as quickly as we could, but I felt like we would never get there. I remember thinking that I might die before we reached the emergency room. The pain was still intense, but I was beginning to feel different. My body felt cold and weak. My thoughts became harder to hold on to. I knew I was losing a lot of blood, but I did not understand how close I was to death. When we arrived at the hospital, the staff checked my blood pressure. It was around 70/40. That is dangerously low. My body did not have enough blood circulating through it. My heart was trying to keep me alive, but there was not enough blood left for it to move properly. They also checked my hemoglobin. It was down to 4. A normal level is much higher. I believe it is usually somewhere around 10 to 14 for women, depending on the person and the test. Mine was so low that I needed blood transfusions. I eventually received 2 units of blood. The hospital bathroom looked like a murder scene. There was blood everywhere. It was on the floor, the toilet, and anything I touched. The amount of blood did not look possible. I remember seeing it and thinking that no person could lose that much and survive. The staff moved quickly, but I could tell they were worried. That frightened me even more. When medical workers look scared, you know the situation is serious. The emergency room doctor tried to stop the bleeding. The experience was painful and frightening. He pushed gauze inside me, trying to slow or control the blood loss. There was no gentleness or comfort in the moment. There was only urgency. He was trying to keep me alive. At one point while he was working, he told us that he could not stop the bleeding. He actually said those words. "I can't stop the bleeding." Hearing that from an emergency room doctor is something I will never forget. Doctors are supposed to know what to do. They are supposed to fix the problem, or at least make you believe they are in control. When the doctor said he could not stop the bleeding, I truly believed I was going to die. I looked at my husband and wondered whether that would be the last time I saw him. I thought about my family. I thought about my son. I thought about all the ordinary things I had done that day without knowing it might be my last. I had sat in a car waiting for a haircut. I had gone into a gas station bathroom thinking I needed to use the toilet. Now I was lying in a hospital, bleeding to death, while a doctor admitted that he could not stop it. Everything had changed in such a short amount of time. There was no dramatic warning. There had been no time to prepare. My gynecologist was called to the hospital. We waited for her while the emergency room team continued trying to keep me stable. I do not know how long that wait truly was, but it felt endless. I was weak from the blood loss and frightened by everything happening around me. People were moving quickly. Machines were making sounds. Nurses were checking me and bringing supplies. I felt like I was watching the room from far away. When my gynecologist finally arrived, she examined the situation and told me I might need a hysterectomy. A hysterectomy would mean removing my uterus. That would permanently end my ability to carry another pregnancy. I had already lost a baby. Now I was being told I might lose the ability to ever have another one. But at that moment, survival mattered more than anything else. I did not want to die. I did not want my son to grow up without his mother. I did not want my family to remember that I had gone to get a haircut with my husband and never came home. If removing my uterus was the only way to save my life, then I knew it had to happen. I was terrified, but I had no strength left to argue or ask many questions. I had trusted my doctor when she told me I did not need a D&C. Now I was lying in the hospital because my body had not safely completed the miscarriage. I do not know whether a D&C from the beginning would have prevented everything. I am not a doctor, and I cannot say what should have been done, but I know the decision not to perform the procedure led to a situation where I nearly bled to death. The medical team continued treating me. The blood transfusions helped replace some of what I had lost. Slowly, my blood pressure and strength began to improve. The bleeding was eventually controlled. I survived. I did not need the hysterectomy they had warned me about, but the possibility had been very real. The fact that I was able to leave the hospital alive felt like a miracle. Recovery was not immediate. Losing that much blood affects your entire body. I was exhausted, weak, and emotionally broken. I had gone through a miscarriage, a hemorrhage, a medical emergency, and the fear that I was going to die. Those were not separate events. They all happened almost at once. People often speak about miscarriage as if it is simply a sad moment followed by physical recovery. For some women, it can be far more dangerous. The body can hold on to tissue. Bleeding can become severe. Infection can happen. Complications can develop quickly. I had believed that because a doctor told me surgery was unnecessary, I was safe. I did not know what warning signs to watch for. I did not know how much blood was too much. I did not know the difference between normal cramping and the kind of pain that meant something was seriously wrong. By the time I understood, I was already hemorrhaging in a gas station bathroom. For a long time after that, I thought about how close I came to dying. What if my husband had taken longer getting his hair cut? What if I had tried to wait until we got home? What if we had not gone to the hospital immediately? What if I had been alone? What if I had passed out in that gas station bathroom before anyone realized what was happening? Any one of those things could have changed the ending. I could have died in a dirty bathroom behind a gas station while strangers walked through the store outside. That thought stayed with me. I also thought about my son. I have one son, and I am deeply grateful for him. When I was in the emergency room, believing that I might not survive, he was one of the strongest thoughts in my mind. I could not bear the idea of leaving him. I wanted to watch him grow up. I wanted to be there for his birthdays, his difficult days, and all the ordinary moments in between. Being alive became something I no longer took for granted. Before that experience, death seemed distant. I knew that people could die suddenly, but I never truly believed it could happen to me in the middle of a normal day. I was young. I thought there would always be more time. That day taught me that life can change within minutes. One moment, you can be sitting in a car waiting for someone to finish a haircut. The next, you can be fighting to stay alive. I still remember the pain. I remember the blood clots. I remember being unable to get off the toilet because the bleeding would not stop. I remember the blood in the car. I remember the hospital bathroom. I remember the emergency room doctor telling us he could not stop the bleeding. I remember hearing the word hysterectomy. Most of all, I remember believing that I was living through my final day. There is a strange calm that can come after extreme fear. At some point, when I realized how serious the situation was, I felt like everything around me became slower. I could hear people talking, but their voices sounded distant. I could see the room, but it did not feel real. I wondered whether that was what dying felt like. I wondered whether I would close my eyes and never open them again. Thankfully, that did not happen. The doctors and nurses were able to save me. The transfusions gave my body the blood it desperately needed. My blood pressure slowly improved. My hemoglobin eventually rose. I was able to go home. But I did not leave the hospital as the same person who had entered it. I had lost a pregnancy, and I had almost lost my own life. I felt grateful and devastated at the same time. I was grateful to be alive, but I was grieving. I was grateful for my son, but I was thinking about the child I had lost. I was relieved that the bleeding had stopped, but I was angry and confused about how it had become so dangerous. There was no simple emotion that could describe it. Healing took time. Physical healing was only one part of it. There was also the fear that stayed in my mind. For a long time, any cramp or unusual pain made me nervous. Seeing blood could bring back memories of that bathroom and hospital. I had learned that the body can go from functioning normally to being in life-threatening danger very quickly. That knowledge is difficult to forget. I also became more willing to ask questions. Being young and trusting a doctor does not make someone foolish. Patients are supposed to be able to trust the people caring for them. But after what happened, I understood the importance of asking what could go wrong, what symptoms were dangerous, and when to go to the hospital. I wish I had been given clearer instructions. I wish someone had explained exactly how much bleeding was too much. I wish I had known that severe stabbing pain and very large clots were not simply part of the normal process. Maybe I would have gone to the hospital sooner. Maybe the entire emergency could have been avoided. I cannot change what happened. All I can do is tell the story. I survived something that easily could have killed me. I needed 2 blood transfusions because my hemoglobin had fallen to 4. My blood pressure was around 70/40. The emergency room doctor could not control the bleeding at first. Those numbers and facts still shock me. They prove that my fear was not an overreaction. I truly was close to death. Sometimes people apologize for telling a long story, especially when the subject is painful. But an experience like this cannot be explained in 1 or 2 sentences. It was not simply a miscarriage. It was not simply heavy bleeding. It was a moment when my entire future almost disappeared. I am alive now. I have my son. I have had years that I almost did not get to experience. I have seen ordinary mornings, birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings that would never have happened if the doctors had not saved me. I am grateful for every one of them. I still carry sadness for the pregnancy I lost, and I still carry fear from that day. Both can exist beside gratitude. I can mourn what happened and still be thankful that I survived. When I think back to that gas station bathroom, I remember how alone and frightened I felt. I remember holding on to the belief that the bleeding would stop, even while part of me knew it would not. I remember my husband saying we had to go to the hospital because I was losing too much blood. That decision saved my life. If we had waited longer, I do not believe I would have survived. That day could have been my last. For a while, I truly thought it was. But it was not. I am still here. And every time I look at my son, I am reminded of how lucky I am to be alive. Several strange things have happened to me over the last few years, but the most recent one took place only a few weeks ago. I still do not know whether it was only a dream, a moment of sleep paralysis, or something that truly happened while I was somewhere between sleeping and waking. I live alone in a small studio apartment. The place is simple, with one main living area and a sleeping space that feels like a separate room, even though everything is close together. Because the apartment is small, I can usually see most of the living room from my bed. At night, when all the lights are off, the apartment becomes very dark. There are no bright streetlights outside my windows, and very little light enters from the hallway. That night seemed completely normal when I went to sleep. I do not remember feeling especially worried or upset. I had not watched a horror movie, read anything frightening, or spent the evening thinking about ghosts or spirits. I was tired, so I got into bed and fell asleep the way I usually did. At some point during the night, I became aware that I was lying in bed. I could feel the mattress beneath me and the blanket over my body. I knew I was in my apartment. I knew where the walls were, where the living room began, and where the door was. But I did not feel fully awake. It was as though my mind had opened its eyes while the rest of me was still asleep. I looked toward the living room and saw something standing there. It was completely black. It did not look like a human being. It had no clear face, arms, legs, or clothes. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a dark cloud shaped almost like a person, but not quite. It was shorter than an average adult. It may have been around the height of a child, though it did not feel like a child at all. Its shape was not solid. The edges seemed unclear, almost as if smoke or darkness had gathered together and was trying to hold one form. The room around it was dark, but the thing was darker than everything else. It did not look like a shadow created by furniture or light from outside. It looked like its own kind of darkness. I knew immediately that it was watching my sleeping area. I could not see any eyes, but I felt its attention on me. The black shape stood in the living room as if it was trying to decide whether it could move closer. It did not rush toward me. It moved slowly, almost carefully. Then it began trying to enter my bedroom area. That was when I noticed the light. My sleeping space was glowing. There was no lamp turned on. The ceiling light was off. The glow was not coming from the window, and it did not look like sunlight or moonlight. It was a soft white light, mixed with a little yellow. The only way I can describe it is by comparing it to the kind of light used in movies when a character enters a holy place, an ancient temple, or heaven. It was bright, but gentle. It filled the whole bedroom area without hurting my eyes. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls glowed. The bed glowed. Even the air around me seemed filled with light. The living room remained dark, and the black figure stood at the edge where the darkness met the glow. I had the strong feeling that it wanted to come inside, but could not. It moved closer to the entrance of the sleeping area. The moment it tried to cross into the light, the entire room flashed. It was not like a light bulb turning on. It was more like a sudden burst of brightness passing through the room. The flash lasted only a moment, but it was powerful. The black thing immediately pulled away. It did not scream or attack. It simply moved back into the living room. And then it disappeared. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. The bedroom remained bright for a little while. I remember feeling that the light was protecting me. I was frightened, but I also felt strangely safe inside it. I knew that whatever the dark thing was, it had failed to enter. I also knew that I was still asleep. That is one of the strangest parts of the experience. I was aware of the apartment, the dark shape, and the glowing room, but I somehow understood that I had not fully woken up. I could feel everything happening around me, yet I could not simply sit up and turn on the lamp. After the black figure disappeared, I slipped deeper into sleep. That was when the nightmare began. In the nightmare, I was running from a large group of people. I did not know who they were or why they wanted me. There were too many of them to count, and they were all chasing me. Some carried knives, others had guns. Their faces were angry, and they seemed completely focused on catching me. I ran through different places, though the locations kept changing the way they often do in dreams. One moment I was moving through narrow streets, and the next I was inside a building or running across an open area. No matter where I went, the people followed. I could hear them shouting behind me. I could hear footsteps getting closer. Every time I thought I had escaped, more people appeared in front of me. I had to turn and run in another direction. The fear felt physical. My chest hurt, my legs felt heavy, and I struggled to breathe. It was as if I had been running for hours. I was not only afraid of being caught, I felt completely surrounded, as though the whole world had turned against me. There was nowhere safe to hide. I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing people holding their weapons as they came closer. Then, I woke up. It was morning. The apartment looked normal again. There was no glowing light in the bedroom. The living room was empty, and nothing black was standing there. I sat up slowly and tried to understand what had happened. My entire body felt tired. I had slept for many hours, but I felt as though I had not rested at all. My muscles were heavy, and my mind felt drained. The exhaustion was stronger than what I usually felt after an ordinary nightmare. I felt like I had truly spent the night fighting, running, and trying to survive. For the rest of that day, I kept thinking about the dark figure and the light. The nightmare about the people chasing me was frightening, but it felt like a normal nightmare compared with the first part. The black thing in the living room felt different. The room had looked exactly like my real apartment. The furniture had been in the correct places. I had known that I was lying in my own bed. The light had also felt real. I could not explain where it came from, or why it appeared at the exact moment the dark shape tried to enter. I began thinking about something that had happened about a year earlier. I am Buddhist, and during that time, I met a Buddhist monk. She was a woman, and there was something very calm about her. She gave me several Buddhist books and prayer texts. One of them was connected to a chant or teaching similar to Namu Mi Renge Kai, though I do not remember the exact title now. She told me to read parts of the books. She also said the books could protect me. She advised me to keep them in my room. At the time, I respected what she said, but I did not know exactly what she meant by protection. I thought she might mean that the teachings would give me peace, help me remain calm, or protect my mind from negative thoughts. I placed the books in my room as she instructed. They remained there, near the place where I slept. After the dream, I could not stop thinking about those books. The black thing had tried to enter my sleeping area, and the room had suddenly filled with a bright white and yellow glow. Then the light flashed, and the dark shape went away. Was the light connected to the books? Was it connected to the monk's prayers? Or had my mind created the image because I remembered being told that the books could protect me? I do not know. I am aware that dreams can be influenced by things we hear and believe. The mind stores memories, fears, and ideas, then mixes them together while we sleep. Maybe my brain remembered the monk saying the books would protect me and created a dream in which a holy light guarded my room. That is a reasonable explanation. But the experience felt stronger than an ordinary dream. It felt as if something had come close to me and had been stopped. Meeting the monk had already been unusual for another reason. The first time my mother met her, she asked the monk to pray for me because I was very sick. My mother did not explain my entire medical history. She did not tell the monk how long I had been struggling. She only asked for prayer. The monk asked to see a photograph of me. My mother showed her one. The monk looked at the picture and told my mother not to worry. She said I would be fine soon. She said that within about a year, my condition would improve. Then she added something that surprised my mother. She said, "It has almost been 10 years, hasn't it?" My mother had never told her that. I had been sick for exactly 10 years. The monk then said that all of it would end soon, and that my mother should not worry about me. My mother later told me what she had said. At first, I did not know what to think. Maybe the monk had guessed. Maybe she had noticed something in my photograph. Maybe she had heard information from someone else without us knowing. But 10 years was a very specific amount of time. My illness had started about a decade earlier, and it had affected a large part of my life. Living with a long illness changes the way you see time. You stop thinking only in days or months. You begin measuring your life by doctor visits, symptoms, medication, improvement, and setbacks. There were times when I wondered whether I would ever feel normal again. My mother worried constantly. She had watched me struggle for years, and she wanted to believe the monk's words. The monk did not look frightened or uncertain when she saw my photograph. She seemed confident. She told my mother that I would recover and that the long period of sickness was nearly over. All of this happened around 2016 or 2017. And she was right. My condition improved. The illness that had troubled me for 10 years finally came to an end. I am fine now. I cannot say whether my recovery happened because of medical treatment, time, prayer, or some combination of many things. I do not want to make claims that I cannot prove. But I remember what the monk said. She knew the length of my illness without being told, and she said I would recover soon. Then, about a year after meeting her, I was much better. That experience made me take her words about the books more seriously. She had told me to keep them in my room because they could protect me. Later, I had a dream or vision in which my bedroom was filled with a holy-looking light while a black shape tried and failed to enter. It is difficult not to connect those events. Maybe the books did not create a physical shield. Maybe they gave me spiritual comfort that appeared in my dream as light. Maybe the teachings helped my mind protect itself from fear. Or maybe there are things around us that we cannot see while we are fully awake. Buddhism teaches many things about suffering, the mind, karma, compassion, and the nature of existence. Different Buddhist traditions have different beliefs about spirits and protection. I am not an expert, and I do not pretend to understand all of it. But my experiences have made me believe that reality may be larger than the part we can see and touch. The black figure may have been sleep paralysis. Many people report seeing dark shapes or shadow-like beings when they are partly awake and unable to move. The brain wakes up before the body, and fear creates powerful images. That explanation fits some parts of what happened. I knew I was in bed. I felt asleep and awake at the same time. I saw something dark standing nearby. Those are common parts of sleep paralysis. But I do not remember feeling fully paralyzed in the usual way. I was not struggling to move or breathe. My attention was focused on the light and the figure. The room did not feel threatening once the glow appeared. It felt protected. The dark figure seemed weaker than the light. I have read that nightmares can leave people exhausted because the body reacts as though the danger is real. The heart beats faster, stress hormones increase, and the muscles remain tense. That could explain why I felt so tired the next day. Still, the experience remains clear in my memory. The dark shape was not simply standing far away. It was trying to enter. The light responded at the exact moment it came closer. The flash seemed to push it back. Afterward, the violent nightmare began, almost as if whatever could not reach me directly found another way to frighten me through the dream. That is only a thought. I cannot prove it. But sometimes I wonder whether the people chasing me with knives and guns were connected to the black figure. Maybe the dark thing was only the beginning of the nightmare. Maybe the entire experience was one long dream. Or maybe the glow protected my room, but could not stop bad images from entering my sleep. Since that night, I have looked at the Buddhist books differently. They are still in my room. I do not treat them like magical objects. I know the teachings inside them are more important than the paper and covers. But I feel comfort when I see them. They remind me of the monk who told my mother I would recover. They remind me that my illness ended after 10 long years. And they remind me of the light that filled my room when something dark tried to come near me. I have not seen the black figure again. Sometimes, when I wake during the night, I look toward the living room. The apartment is usually dark and quiet. Furniture creates strange shapes in the shadows, and small sounds from the building can seem louder when I am alone. But I have never again seen that short cloud-like form standing there. I have also never seen the bedroom glow in the same way. Part of me hopes I never experience anything like it again. Another part of me feels grateful that if something truly was there, something else seemed to be protecting me. The experience did not make me certain about ghosts, spirits, or supernatural beings. I still question what happened. I still consider ordinary explanations. Dreams can feel real. Illness can change the mind. Stress can create frightening images. Sleep paralysis can make a familiar room look haunted. But I also remember the monk's words. She did not know me well. My mother had not told her the details. Yet she looked at my photograph, said I had been sick for almost 10 years, and said it would end soon. Then it did. Because of that, I cannot completely dismiss the possibility that she understood something we did not. Maybe she saw something in my face. Maybe her experience as a monk helped her recognize a condition or emotional state. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was spiritual knowledge. I do not know. What I know is that I was sick for 10 years, and now I am well. I know she told me to keep the books in my room for protection. I know I later saw my room filled with a gentle temple like light. I know the black thing could not enter. And I know that after it disappeared, I woke from another nightmare feeling as if I had fought for my life all night. These events could all be unrelated. They could be coincidences connected by my own mind. But when I remember them together, they feel like parts of the same story. A long illness began to end. A monk offered prayers and teachings. Books were placed near my bed. Then, during one strange night, darkness came close and light forced it away. I may never know whether that night was only a dream. Maybe it does not matter. The fear was real. The exhaustion was real. And the feeling of protection was real too. That is what has stayed with me most. I do not remember the black figure as something that defeated me. I remember it as something that tried to enter and failed. Whatever the glowing light was, it remained stronger. Even now, when I feel afraid or uncertain, I think about that moment. I picture the dark shape standing outside the bedroom. I picture the white and yellow glow surrounding the bed. Then, I remember the flash. The darkness moved away, and I was still there, safe inside the light. A few years ago, I lived in an old apartment building in Hollywood, California. This was long before the neighborhood started changing and becoming more modern. Back then, the area had a very different reputation. It wasn't considered a safe place to live, especially late at night. The building itself matched the neighborhood. It was old, worn down, and looked like it had been standing there for decades. The hallways were dimly lit. The elevator was ancient, and every part of the building seemed to creak and groan. It wasn't the kind of place that looked haunted, but it definitely had an atmosphere that made you feel uneasy after dark. Most of the frightening experiences there had nothing to do with ghosts or anything supernatural. The neighborhood itself was scary enough. There were nights when people would be hanging around outside the entrance, and sometimes they would follow residents toward the building. More than once, someone had to hurry inside because they felt like they were being chased. It wasn't unusual to hear shouting in the middle of the night or police sirens echoing through the streets. There were even drive-by shootings in the area from time to time. Living there meant always being aware of your surroundings. You learned to keep your head down, move quickly, and avoid being outside any longer than necessary after dark. My boyfriend lived there with me for a while, and he quickly realized how rough the neighborhood really was. One night, he had an experience that convinced both of us it was finally time to leave. He had been walking back to the apartment when someone started chasing him. Thankfully, he managed to get inside the building safely. But it scared both of us badly. After that, we agreed we didn't want to keep living somewhere that made us feel unsafe every time we came home. Almost immediately, we started looking for another apartment. It didn't take very long before we found a new place. Once everything was arranged, we began packing up our belongings and moving them little by little. Most of the furniture had already been taken out. Boxes were stacked near the door. The apartment looked emptier every day. Finally, our last night in that building arrived. We only had a few small things left to finish before handing over the apartment. It was already very late. I think it was around 1 o'clock in the morning. The building was unusually quiet. Normally you could hear televisions through the walls or someone walking down the hallway. But that night, everything seemed completely still. We realized we still needed to grab some cleaning supplies from my boyfriend's car before finishing up. So we stepped into the hallway together and called for the elevator. The old elevator arrived with its usual slow mechanical noises. We got inside and rode down to the ground floor. I remember paying attention because there wasn't anything unusual about it. The elevator was completely empty. There was nothing on the floor, nothing sitting in the corners, nothing that looked even slightly out of place. We reached the lobby, and the doors opened. My boyfriend hurried outside to the parking lot where his car was parked. I stayed inside near the elevator entrance. Since he was only grabbing a few cleaning supplies, I figured it would only take a minute or two. I stood there waiting. The hallway was completely silent. No one entered the building. No one walked past me. I occasionally glanced toward the elevator doors. They remained closed the entire time. One thing I clearly remember is that the elevator never left. There was no sound of it moving, no humming, no cables. Nothing. The floor indicator didn't change. As far as I could tell, it stayed exactly where we had left it. A minute or two later, my boyfriend came back inside, carrying what we needed from the car. I smiled, reached over, and pressed the elevator button. The doors opened almost immediately. The moment they slid apart, both of us froze. Sitting quietly in the back corner of the elevator was a doll. Not a small toy someone might accidentally drop. This thing was huge. It was probably around 2 feet tall. It looked old. Very old. It wasn't one of those modern plastic dolls. It looked Victorian. It had old-fashioned clothing, pale skin, and that kind of face older dolls often have that many people find unsettling. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't lying on the floor. It was sitting upright in the corner, perfectly still, almost as if someone had carefully placed it there. For a few seconds, neither of us said a word. We simply stared. Both of us were trying to understand how it could possibly be there. The elevator had been completely empty only minutes earlier. We had ridden down in it ourselves. I knew exactly what it looked like. There hadn't been any doll. Even stranger, the elevator hadn't moved after we got out. I had been standing only a few feet away from it the entire time. Nobody had called it. Nobody had stepped inside. At least, no one that I had seen. The building had been completely empty. The hallway had remained silent. Yet somehow this old Victorian doll had appeared inside. We looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to be the first person to say what we were both thinking. Finally, without saying much of anything, we stepped into the elevator. The doll remained sitting in the corner. Neither of us touched it. Neither of us even got close to it. We stood on the opposite side of the elevator during the ride. The trip from the lobby to the second floor wasn't long, but it felt much longer than usual. The silence inside that tiny elevator was almost unbearable. I kept glancing toward the doll. It never moved. It simply sat there exactly as it had been when the doors first opened. The old elevator slowly climbed toward our floor. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us laughed. Neither of us tried to explain what we were seeing. We simply waited for the doors to open. When the elevator reached the second floor, the doors finally slid open. We stepped out as quickly as we could. The doors closed behind us. For a second, we just stood there in the hallway, staring at each other. Then, almost at the same time, we both said some version of, "What was that?" Neither of us could explain it. We hadn't imagined it, because we'd both seen exactly the same thing. After standing there for a moment, curiosity got the better of us. We turned back toward the elevator. I pressed the call button again. The elevator hadn't gone anywhere. It should have still been sitting right there. A few seconds later, the doors opened. The elevator was completely empty. The doll was gone. There wasn't a single sign that it had ever been there. No old toy, no clothing, nothing. Just the same empty elevator we'd been using throughout the move. We looked into every corner. Nothing. Neither of us had seen anyone remove it. No one had entered the hallway. No one had used the elevator between the time we stepped out and called it again. It had only been a matter of seconds, yet somehow, the doll had completely disappeared. We stood there trying to come up with logical explanations. Maybe someone had placed it there while my boyfriend was outside. But that didn't explain how they could have gotten in and out without me seeing them. Maybe someone had taken it away before we called the elevator again. But there simply wasn't enough time. The entire thing happened too quickly. We eventually gave up trying to figure it out. There wasn't much else we could do. We finished cleaning the apartment, packed the last few things, and tried not to think about it anymore. Still, every time we passed that elevator for the rest of the night, I couldn't help looking inside. It remained completely empty. Nothing unusual happened again. The next morning, we loaded the last of our belongings into the car. As we drove away from that old apartment building for the final time, I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. Of course, most of that relief came from finally leaving a dangerous neighborhood behind. We no longer had to worry about being followed home or hearing violence outside our window at night. But if I'm being honest, another part of me was also relieved that I would never have to ride that old elevator again. To this day, I still have no explanation for where that Victorian doll came from, or where it disappeared to only moments later. Maybe there was some ordinary explanation that we simply never discovered. Maybe someone was playing a strange prank, or maybe it was just one of those bizarre moments that can't easily be explained. Whatever the truth is, it remains one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. Out of everything that happened while living in that old Hollywood apartment, including the crime, the frightening neighborhood, and the late-night encounters outside, the one memory that still stands out the most is opening the elevator doors at 1 o'clock in the morning and finding an old Victorian doll quietly sitting in the corner, only for it to vanish without a trace just moments later. I've never been happier to move out of a place than I was the very next day. I grew up in a small farming town, and from the outside, it probably looked like a quiet place. There were open fields everywhere, long roads with very few streetlights, old houses, barns, and miles of land where people grew crops. During the day, it could even look peaceful. You would see tractors moving slowly down the road, workers in the fields, and trucks carrying produce through town. But the town was not as safe as it looked. The crime rate was very high, especially for a place that small. People who did not live there would probably never expect it. There were robberies, fights, shootings, and sometimes murders. One year, the new year had barely started when someone was already killed. It had not even been 1 full hour since midnight. That was the kind of town it was. When my brother and I were children, we often heard gunshots at night. Sometimes they came from far away. Other times they sounded close enough to make us stop whatever we were doing and listen. We would joke that the sounds were fireworks. It was easier to laugh about it than admit we were scared. Probably just fireworks, one of us would say. Even when there was no holiday. Even when it was the middle of the week. Even when we both knew fireworks did not sound like that. Our parents did not let us stay outside too late. And we learned from a young age to pay attention to what was happening around us. We knew which streets were safer and which places we should avoid. We knew not to walk around alone at night. We also knew that if we heard shouting or gunshots, we should stay away from the windows. Living there made danger feel normal. That did not mean we were never afraid. It only meant we learned to keep moving even when something made us uncomfortable. By the time I was 18, I was learning how to drive. My dad was the one teaching me. He usually took me out late at night because the roads were quieter. There were fewer cars, fewer people crossing the street, and less pressure while I was still learning. I could practice turns, stopping, and controlling the speed without worrying about traffic behind me. Most of our lessons happened around 11 at night. My dad would sit in the passenger seat and give instructions while I drove. He was patient, but serious. He wanted me to become a safe driver. If I made a mistake, he corrected me immediately. One night, I asked if we could drive near the fields. The roads around the fields were long and mostly empty, so I thought it would be a good place to practice. There were also several turns where I could work on slowing down and controlling the car. My dad agreed. We left the main part of town and started driving toward the farming area. As soon as we reached the roads near the fields, everything became darker. There were no stores, homes, or gas stations nearby. There were only fields on both sides and occasional lines of trees. The road looked narrow under the headlights, even though it was wide enough for 2 cars. The darkness outside the headlights felt complete. You could not see far into the fields. During the day, the land stretched out for a long distance. At night, it looked like a black wall. There were no streetlights. The moon was not bright enough to help. Our headlights created a tunnel of light in front of us, but everything beyond that tunnel disappeared. I remember feeling nervous, but I did not say anything. I was also excited because I was getting better at driving and wanted to prove I could handle the road. My dad reminded me to keep both hands on the steering wheel and stay in my lane. I nodded and continued. For the first part of the drive, everything was normal. We passed empty fields and a few dirt roads. I practiced keeping a steady speed. My dad told me when to slow down before curves and how to watch the sides of the road. The inside of the car felt safe. The doors were locked, the engine was running smoothly, and my dad was beside me. Then, we approached a right turn. The road ahead became slightly wider near the corner, and I noticed a car parked on the side. At first, I did not think much about it. Cars sometimes stopped on those roads. Someone might have had engine trouble or a flat tire. Farmers also parked near the fields during the day. But it was around 11 at night. There were no buildings nearby. The car was sitting in almost complete darkness. As we got closer, our headlights reached it. That was when I saw a man standing near the road. He was waving at us. His movements looked urgent. He raised both arms and tried to get our attention. I immediately thought something was wrong. Maybe his car had broken down. Maybe he needed help. Maybe someone inside was hurt. I had only been driving for a short time, and my first instinct was to slow down so I could see what was happening. I moved my foot toward the brake. My dad noticed. "Don't slow down," he said. His voice changed. He had been calm during the lesson, but now he sounded serious and alert. I looked at him for half a second, confused. The man continued waving. He looked frightened. For a moment, I felt guilty for not stopping. I thought he might truly be in danger. My dad began saying something else, probably telling me to keep going, but before he could finish, the man moved. He ran directly into the road. He did not simply step closer. He jumped in front of the car. Everything happened so fast that I barely had time to react. His body appeared in the headlights only a few feet ahead of us. I turned the steering wheel quickly. The car swerved. For one terrible second, I thought I was going to hit him. I saw his face in the light. He looked scared. But there was also something strange about the way he had placed himself in front of us. It did not feel like someone asking for help anymore. It felt like he was trying to force us to stop. The tires moved toward the edge of the road, and my dad told me to straighten the wheel. I corrected the car and pressed the gas. We passed the man by only a small distance. I did not look back. I was too frightened. I could hear my dad telling me to keep driving. "Go," he said. "Don't stop." I pushed down harder on the gas pedal. The car sped away from the corner. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept expecting headlights to appear behind us. I thought the man might get into his car and follow. I checked the rearview mirror. At first, I could not see anything except darkness. Then I saw the road behind us in the weak red glow from our taillights. No other car was moving. Still, I did not slow down. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my chest. My dad told me to breathe and focus on the road. I tried, but my mind was racing. What if the man had really needed help? What if someone was hurt? What if we had left a person in danger? At the same time, another thought was much stronger. Why had he jumped in front of the car? A person asking for help would stand near the road and wave. They might shout. They might hold up a phone. They would not suddenly throw themselves in front of a moving vehicle unless they were desperate or trying to make it stop. My dad seemed to understand what I was thinking. He told me that stopping on an isolated road at night could be extremely dangerous. The man might not have been alone. Other people could have been hiding in the fields or inside the parked car. The moment we stopped, they could have surrounded us. They could have pulled us from the vehicle, robbed us, or done something worse. My dad said the man might have been trying to create a fake emergency. He might have wanted us to lower the window. He might have wanted me to get out of the car. Once the car stopped, we would have lost our best way to escape. I listened without saying much. The idea made me feel sick. I had almost slowed down. If my dad had not been there, I probably would have stopped. I was young and inexperienced. I wanted to help someone who looked frightened. That instinct could have placed us in danger. We kept driving until we reached a more populated road. As soon as I saw streetlights and houses again, I felt slightly safer. My dad told me to pull into a well-lit area. I parked and turned off the engine. For a while, neither of us spoke. My hands were still shaking. I stared at the steering wheel and tried to understand how quickly the situation had changed. A few minutes earlier, I had been practicing a normal right turn. Then, a stranger had jumped in front of the car. I asked my dad if he thought the man was trying to rob us. He said he did not know for certain, but the situation was dangerous enough that we had made the right choice. He reminded me that our town had a high crime rate and that people sometimes use tricks to make drivers stop. A parked car could be part of the trap. A person could pretend to be injured. Someone might lie in the road. A frightened-looking person might wave for help. The goal was to make the driver feel guilty or worried enough to stop. Once the car stopped, the situation could become violent very quickly. My dad told me never to stop in a dark, isolated place for a stranger, especially late at night. If I believed someone truly needed help, I should keep driving until I reached a safe place, and then call the police or emergency services. I should not leave the vehicle. I should not unlock the doors. I should not lower the window. At the time, I felt bad because the man had looked so scared. But my dad explained that fear could be an act. A person planning to rob someone would not always look threatening. If he stood in the road holding a weapon, no driver would stop. Looking helpless was more effective. That thought stayed with me. Danger does not always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like someone who needs help. After we calmed down, my dad drove us home. I did not feel confident enough to continue the lesson. During the drive back, I kept checking the mirrors. No one followed us. The roads behind us remained empty. When we reached home, I locked the car and looked down the street before going inside. I knew the man was miles away, but I still felt as though he might somehow appear. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him stepping into the headlights. I remembered how close he had been to the front of the car. I thought about what would have happened if I had hit the brakes instead of swerving. The car would have stopped only a few feet from him. He could have walked to my side before I understood what was happening. My doors may have been locked, but the windows were ordinary glass. If he had a weapon, a locked door might not have protected us. I also wondered if others had been waiting nearby. The fields were dark enough to hide several people. Someone could have been standing only 20 feet away, and we would not have seen them. The parked car could have been empty, or it could have contained people ready to move once we stopped. We would never know. For the next several days, I thought about reporting the incident. I do not remember whether my dad contacted anyone, but we had very little information. We did not know the man's name. I had not seen his face clearly enough to describe him well. I did not know the make or model of the parked car. The road was dark, and everything had happened in seconds. Even if police went there later, the man in the car would probably be gone. The lack of answers made the experience more unsettling. Maybe the man truly needed help. Maybe he had been injured or running from someone. Maybe his phone was dead, and he thought stopping a car was his only chance. But that explanation still did not feel right. If he needed help, he could have stayed on the side of the road and shouted. Jumping in front of us could have caused a serious accident. I could have lost control of the car and driven off the road. He could have been killed. My dad and I could have been injured. His actions seemed too reckless. They made more sense if he believed we would panic and stop. That was what he wanted. As the years passed, I became more certain that my dad's warning had saved us. The town did not become safer. There were more crimes, more shootings, and more stories about people being attacked in isolated areas. Sometimes I heard about carjackings or robberies where victims were tricked into stopping. Those stories always reminded me of the man near the fields. I began wondering whether he had tried the same thing with another driver later that night. Maybe someone else stopped. Maybe they believed his frightened expression. Maybe they opened the door. I hope nothing happened, but I will never know. The experience changed the way I drive at night. Even now, when I see a car stopped on the side of a dark road, I become alert. I look for movement. I check the mirrors. I make sure the doors are locked. I feel bad driving past someone who might need help, but I remember my dad's advice. I can call for assistance from a safe location. I do not need to place myself in danger. There is a difference between helping and becoming another victim. People sometimes judge drivers for not stopping. They imagine that every person on the side of the road is innocent. Most probably are, but it only takes one dangerous situation to change or end your life. The road near the fields was the perfect place for an ambush. It was dark. It was isolated. There were no cameras, businesses, or houses nearby. A driver could disappear there, and no one might notice for hours. The fields gave people plenty of places to hide. The high crime rate in our town made the situation even more dangerous. That is why my dad reacted so quickly. He understood the risk before I did. He did not need to know exactly what the man wanted. The situation itself was enough. A parked car on a dark road, a stranger waving, a young driver slowing down. Then the stranger jumping directly in front of the vehicle. Every part of it was wrong. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had been alone. I might have stopped before he jumped into the road. I might have rolled down the window and asked if he was okay. I might have stepped out to help. Because I was only 18, I probably would have believed whatever he told me. My dad's presence changed everything. He had more experience. He recognized that the man's behavior was not normal. his voice stopped me from pressing the brake. Then, when the man moved in front of us, my fear took over and helped me escape. I am grateful I did not freeze. I could have panicked and stopped the car in the middle of the road. Instead, I swerved, straightened the wheel, and accelerated. It was not perfect driving, but it kept us moving. My dad later told me that stopping is often the most dangerous thing you can do in a situation like that. A moving car gives you distance and protection. Once you stop, strangers can control what happens next. That lesson stayed with me more strongly than anything else he taught me during those driving lessons. I learned how to park, make turns, watch mirrors, and control speed. But I also learned to trust the feeling that something is wrong. You do not always need proof. You do not have to wait until someone shows a weapon. Sometimes the location, the time, and the behavior are enough. If a situation feels unsafe, keep moving. For years, I worried that the story did not sound frightening enough when I told it. There was no attack. No one chased us. We were not robbed. The man did not show a weapon. We got away safely. But that does not mean there was no danger. The fear came from what almost happened. I had started slowing down. The man saw it. Then, he jumped in front of us. If my dad had not spoken at that exact moment, the car might have stopped. We may have discovered what he wanted. I am glad we did not. The most disturbing memories are not always the ones where something terrible happens. Sometimes they are the moments where you realize how close you came to something terrible. A few seconds made the difference. A warning from my dad. A quick turn of the wheel. A foot pressing the gas instead of the brake. That was all that separated us from whatever waited on that dark road. I still remember the man's face in the headlights. He looked afraid. Maybe he truly was. Maybe someone was threatening him. Maybe he had a reason for acting that way. But I also remember how he moved. He did not step into the road slowly. He threw himself directly in front of the car. It looked less like a request for help and more like an order to stop. That is why I still believe we made the right choice. The town where I grew up taught me that danger can exist anywhere, even between quiet fields. During the day, those same roads looked harmless. Farmers worked nearby. Birds flew over the crops. The land stretched peacefully under the sun. At night, the fields became something else. The darkness hid everything. A person could stand only a few feet away and remain invisible. A parked car could look abandoned. A man could wave like he needed help. And a young driver could make one kind decision that placed everyone in the car at risk. I have many strange and frightening stories from that town. Some involve gunshots. Some involve people behaving in ways I still do not understand. But this memory remains one of the clearest because it happened during such an ordinary moment. I was only learning how to drive. My dad was sitting beside me. We were practicing turns on an empty road. Then a stranger stepped out of the darkness and tried to stop us. I will never know who he was. I will never know why his car was parked there. I will never know whether someone else was hiding in the fields. And I will never know what would have happened if we had stopped. I only know that my dad told me to keep driving, so I did. That may have saved both of our lives. When I was younger, I had a serious fear of the dark. It was not the kind of fear that disappeared when an adult told me there was nothing in the room. I knew the usual explanations. I knew shadows came from furniture, trees, curtains, and headlights passing outside. I knew the house was locked. My family was nearby, and monsters were not supposed to be real. None of that helped once the lights went out. At night, every familiar object in my bedroom seemed to change. A pile of clothes on a chair became a person sitting silently in the corner. The open closet became a dark doorway leading somewhere it should not. Small branches outside my window scraped against the glass and sounded like fingernails. My bedroom was on the second floor of our house. During the day, I liked being upstairs because I could look down at the street and see the tops of cars passing by. At night, being high above the ground usually made me feel safer. I knew no one could simply stand outside my window. At least, that was what I believed. I always slept with a nightlight beside my bed. It was small and not very bright, but it gave off enough light for me to see the main shapes in the room. As long as I could see my dresser, the bedroom door, and the edge of my bed, I felt less trapped. The nightlight created shadows of its own, though. If the curtains moved slightly or a car passed outside, the shadows stretched across the wall. Because of that, I usually pulled the curtains closed as tightly as I could before getting into bed. They were thick curtains, and they blocked most of the outside light. When they were fully closed, my room felt like a small protected space, separated from the dark world outside. One night, I was having more trouble falling asleep than usual. I do not remember why. Maybe I had watched something frightening earlier. Maybe I had simply been restless. Children do not always need a clear reason to become afraid at night. Sometimes the fear begins with one strange sound or one thought that refuses to leave. I lay under my blanket and stared at the ceiling. The nightlight glowed beside me, covering the nearby wall in a weak yellow light. Everything else was quiet. I could hear the normal sounds of the house. Pipes moved softly inside the walls. A floorboard made a small cracking sound as the temperature changed. Somewhere downstairs, a clock was ticking. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. A few minutes later, I opened them again. Something had changed near the window. There was a thin opening between the curtains. I thought I had pulled them completely closed, but a narrow slit remained where the two sides met. Through that slit, I could see two red lights. At first, I did not move. The lights were small, bright, and close together. They shone through the opening in the curtains and created two thin red marks on the fabric. I tried to tell myself they came from outside. There were streetlights near our house, and cars sometimes parked along the road. Maybe I was seeing the rear lights of a vehicle. Maybe someone had stopped outside with their brakes on. That explanation made sense for a few seconds. Then I remembered where my bedroom window was. I was on the second floor. The street was below and farther away. From my bed, I could not normally see car lights through that part of the window. The angle was wrong. The red lights were too high. They did not appear to be coming from the road. I stayed still and watched them. They did not move. If they belonged to a passing car, they should have disappeared. If they belonged to a parked car, they should have been lower. These lights seemed to be directly outside the window. The longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. They were also the wrong shade of red for a streetlight or vehicle. They were deep and bright at the same time, almost like glowing coals. I pulled the blanket closer to my face. I thought about calling for my parents, but I was afraid they would tell me to stop being silly and go back to sleep. I had been frightened by ordinary shadows many times before. I did not want to wake everyone because of two lights outside. So I tried to ignore them. I turned onto my other side, facing away from the window. I closed my eyes. For a short time, I focused on the nightlight and the warm glow against my eyelids. I counted slowly in my head. I tried to think about school, cartoons, and anything else that felt normal, but I could still feel those lights behind me. That may sound impossible, but it felt as if something was watching through the slit in the curtains. Even with my back turned, I could imagine the two red points remaining completely still. After a while, I rolled over again. The lights were still there. They had not moved even slightly. My fear became stronger. I started looking for normal explanations again. Maybe a reflection from the night light was hitting the glass. Maybe there were two small decorations hanging near the window. Maybe the red lights came from a distant tower. But I had slept in that room every night. I knew what the window normally looked like. I had never seen anything like them before. I waited for them to disappear. They did not. The room felt quieter than before. Even the usual sounds of the house seemed to stop. I became aware of my own breathing. It sounded too loud. I worried that whatever was outside could hear it. Eventually, I knew I would not be able to sleep while the lights were there. I had two choices. I could call for help, or I could go to the window and find out what they were. For some reason, I chose the window. Maybe I was embarrassed. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing outside. I had been scared by harmless things before, and I believed this would be the same. Once I opened the curtains, I expected to see a normal explanation. A light on a pole. A reflection. A bird sitting near the glass. Something simple. I slowly pushed the blanket away. The movement seemed incredibly loud in the silent room. I lowered one foot to the floor, then the other. The boards were cold under my feet. I did not stand up fully. Instead, I crouched beside the bed. I thought staying low would keep me hidden from whatever was outside. I was only a child, and it seemed like a good plan at the time. The two red lights remained visible through the gap. They did not follow my movement. I began crawling toward the window. Every few seconds, I stopped and looked at the curtains. The red glow was still there. The distance between my bed and the window was not very far, but that night it felt much larger. The night light became weaker behind me, and the area near the curtains was mostly dark. As I moved closer, I expected the lights to become clearer. They did not. They remained two red points shining through the narrow opening. I reached the wall beneath the window and crouched there. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it. For a moment, I almost turned around. I could have gone back to bed, pulled the blanket over my head, and waited for morning. But I was already close. I told myself I had to look. I slowly raised my hand toward the curtains. My fingers touched the fabric. The red light seemed brighter from that distance. I took a breath, grabbed both sides of the curtains, and pulled them open as quickly as I could. I expected to see the empty night sky. Instead, something huge was directly outside the window. All I saw was a massive gray shape covered in something that looked like fur. It filled nearly the entire window. My mind could not understand it. The shape was too close and too large. I could not see a complete face or body. I only saw gray fuzz pressed near the glass and darkness around it. The two red lights had been its eyes. At least, that was what I believed in that instant. I screamed and threw myself backward. I do not remember deciding to run. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned away from the window and rushed toward the bedroom door. Behind me, I heard a loud buzzing sound. It was deep and rough, almost like giant wings beating rapidly against the air. It did not sound like an ordinary insect. It was too loud for that. The sound seemed to fill the room. I reached the door, pulled it open, and ran into the hallway. The hallway was dark, but I did not care anymore. A few seconds earlier, I had been afraid of leaving the light in my bedroom. Now, the bedroom was the last place I wanted to be. I remember moving a short distance into the hallway and then lowering myself to the floor. My body felt weak, my heart was still racing, and I expected the gray thing to come through the window or follow me out of the room. I stayed close to the wall, staring at my open bedroom door. The nightlight was still glowing inside. Nothing came out. The buzzing stopped. I wanted to call for my parents, but I do not remember making any sound. I may have been too frightened or too tired. At some point, while lying on the hallway floor, I fell asleep. That is one of the strangest parts of the memory. I had just seen what I believed was a monster outside my second-floor window, yet my body simply shut down. Maybe the fear exhausted me. Maybe I fainted instead of falling asleep. I do not know. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up later. Morning light had begun to enter the house, and I was still in the hallway near my bedroom. For a few seconds, I did not understand why I was on the floor. Then, I remembered the red lights and the gray shape. I looked toward my room. The curtains were open. The window looked normal. There was nothing outside. I was afraid to go back in, but daylight made everything less frightening. The shadows had disappeared, and the room looked like my ordinary bedroom again. I slowly entered. I checked the window from a distance. There were no marks on the glass. Nothing had broken. The window was still closed. I looked outside. The side of the house was too high for a person to stand there. There was no balcony, roof, or large branch directly beneath the window. Whatever I had seen could not have been someone looking in from the ground. That made the memory even more frightening. For a while, I believed a monster had visited my window. I imagined a huge gray creature floating outside, watching me through the curtains with glowing red eyes. I thought the buzzing sound came from wings. Maybe it had flown away after I opened the curtains. I did not want to sleep in that room again. I kept the curtains fully closed and checked them several times before getting into bed. Sometimes I placed objects in front of them to make sure they could not move apart. If I noticed even a tiny opening, I got up and fixed it. The night light stayed on. Some nights, I also left the hallway light on and kept my bedroom door open. I do not remember exactly what my parents said when I told them. They may have believed I had a nightmare. Adults often assume that strange childhood experiences come from dreams, especially when they happen late at night. Maybe they were right. It is possible that I dreamed the entire event. I had been tired and frightened. I may have fallen asleep in bed, dreamed about the lights and the creature, then sleepwalked into the hallway. But the memory does not feel like an ordinary dream. I remember the cold floor under my feet. I remember touching the curtains. I remember seeing the gray mass fill the window. I remember running through the open bedroom door. Most clearly, I remember the buzzing. For years, I had no reasonable explanation. Then, as I became older, I began thinking it may have been an owl. That is the only animal I can imagine being large enough to frighten me and able to reach a second-floor window. Owls can have very large eyes. In certain light, their eyes can reflect red. Some species are covered in gray or brown feathers that might look like fur to a frightened child. If an owl had landed on the outer window ledge or flown close to the glass, it could have filled much of my view. The buzzing sound may have been its wings when it flew away. That explanation is much more reasonable than a monster. I may have seen two reflected eyes through the curtains, opened them suddenly, frightened the owl, and then panicked when it spread its wings. Because I was young and already afraid of the dark, my mind may have changed the bird into something much larger and more threatening. The gray feathers became fur. The reflected eyes became red lights. The beating wings became an unnatural buzzing. That is what I tell myself now. Still, there are parts of the story that bother me. Why had the owl remained at the window for so long? I had watched the red lights for what felt like several minutes. Most wild birds would not stay completely still while a child moved around inside a room. How had it held on to the outside of the window? I do not remember a wide ledge. And why did the gray shape seem so enormous? Childhood memory can exaggerate size, but I remember it covering almost the entire view. It may also have been a large moth very close to the glass. A small creature can look huge when it is only inches from your face. Some moths have markings that resemble eyes, and their wings can create a loud fluttering sound. But the red lights seemed separate and bright. They looked directly at me. Another possibility is that I was partly asleep. There is a condition called sleep paralysis, where a person becomes aware of the room while still dreaming. People can see figures, lights, animals, or faces that are not really there. I do not remember being unable to move, though. I got out of bed, crawled to the window, opened the curtains, and ran away. Unless all of that movement happened inside the dream. The fact that I woke in the hallway makes the experience harder to explain. If it was only a dream, how did I end up outside my room? Maybe I sleepwalked. Maybe I woke up frightened, walked into the hallway, and then forgot the real order of events. Memories from childhood are not perfect. The mind can combine dreams with real moments. Over the years, details may have become stronger or changed slightly. I accept that. But even if the creature was only an owl, the fear I felt was real. I can still picture those two red lights shining through the slit in the curtains. I can still remember crouching beneath the window and trying to convince myself that there was nothing dangerous outside. I can still feel the moment I threw the curtains open and saw the gray mass in front of me. Sometimes I wonder what I would have seen if I had remained there for one more second. Would the shape have turned into an ordinary bird? Would I have noticed feathers, a beak, and wings? Or would I have seen something that did not belong outside any window? Running away kept me from learning the truth. Maybe that was for the best. As an adult, I prefer the owl explanation. It allows everything to make sense. The height of the window explains why it had to be a bird. The red lights were reflected eyes. The fuzzy gray mass was its feathers. The buzzing was the sound of its wings. My childhood fear made it look much larger than it really was. That is probably what happened. At least, that is what I tell myself. But I still do not like sleeping with even a small gap between the curtains. Whenever I see two distant red lights at night, I think about that bedroom. I remember lying beside my nightlight and watching something look back at me from outside the second-floor window. I remember the gray shape. I remember the buzzing, and I remember waking on the hallway floor with the curtains still open. Maybe it was only an owl. Maybe my frightened young mind turned a normal animal into a monster. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder why an owl's eyes would have been so perfectly level with mine, and why it seemed to be waiting for me to open the curtains.